Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Climate Change, Economy and Development Transitional Committee. And today we'll be addressing the thorny issue of the local plan. We've got officers in attendance who will give us a brief outline on what we're discussing, and then all members will be given the opportunity to ask questions and to scrutinise the options available to us. At the end of that, I will ask by roll call for people to express a preference for which of the options they feel is most appropriate for the future of our city. We are a non-decision making group as a transitional committee, so we do not carry any commitment on the council to undertake what we do, but we are here in an advisory capacity. And I'm very, very mindful, and I want to go on record early to say that not only as officers in Simon and Michael spent a lot of time discussing this issue with us and trying to bring this to the fore so we can progress with this, but I'd also like to really thank the members of this committee who have dedicated a lot of time agonising over the decision in front of us and the options available to us. So I'm really, really pleased for the cross-party way in which this has been pursued, and I look forward to that sense being carried forward. And I really, really do appreciate the efforts from everybody in doing this. So what we will now do is we'll push ahead with the agenda. Welcome and housekeeping arrangements. Are we expecting any fire alarms, tests or anything? No. So if we do have a fire alarm, we are to make our way to an emergency exit, and the muster point is where the theatres are. In Tudor Square. I say this every meeting and I forget every time, so I think it's worthwhile reminding myself for my own stupidity, if not anything else. Apologies and absences. I'm aware that Councillor Gibson is not able to attend with us today, and I can't see any other absences other than Martin Smith, who has got a substitute of Mike Lavery, has stood in at late hour. So thank you, Mike, and very welcome to the committee. We look forward to hearing your input today. And I don't believe there's anything that we need to exclude the public or the press on today. So that should cover off point 3 as far as we're concerned. Declarations of interest. Anybody have any declarations of interest on the local plan other than the fact we live in Sheffield and it affects us greatly? No? Okay, so we can skip ahead of that one. We can move on to the minutes of the previous meetings listed page 9 to 14. I'm hoping everyone's had a chance to see the minutes of the previous meeting. So I'll briefly ask for any matters of accuracy rather than going through page by page. I'll just take it as an entirety. No, everyone's mostly content with the content of that report, then that's fine. Any matters arising from those minutes that anyone would like to bring up? So from my own point, I can say that I had a meeting with Doug and officers last week, and we did discuss bringing forward a working plan of what we'd want to do, and I know Paul has just indicated he was also in that meeting. I didn't want to name and shame you, mate, but you were in that meeting with us as well. So we have discussed with officers about bringing forward that work stream, and I believe that that is in hand at the moment, and hopefully we'll come back to the committee in a timely manner. Any other
Chair,
issues?
if I can?
Yeah.
Just matters arising. You'll see item 8 is actually the printed version of responses to all the questions that were raised by the public on the 10th of November. So that's there for information, so it closes off any questions and some responses.
Thanks, Alice. So, yeah, did all the responses go out? Do we know?
Yes, I did have one query back that something might have been missed, but I've done a double check and I need to just follow it up. But what I did in a sort of sensible, not individual emails, it's all in this one composite document that was sent by email to everybody that had raised a question. So all those who raised a question have had the entire document.
Excellent. So hopefully everyone's received everything that they were looking for. Whether it's satisfactory or not remains to be seen. But we'll see what's going on there. Okay, so we've pretty much covered off the top part of the agenda. We now can move on to the public questions. Now, I've noticed that Jenny Carpenter is waiting eagerly to address the committee. So, Jenny, if you would like to come forward and take a seat, and Happy New Year and welcome to you. Glad to see you.
I found that one. Whoops! Yes, too strong. Typically me, I do everything a bit too hard. As a member of South Yorkshire Climate Alliance, I'm anxious to find out how successful the Council has been in rolling out the carbon literacy training to its members and officers. The rapid reduction in carbon emissions that we need will only be achieved if each contemplated decision is taken with this as a priority. And so I wish to put this question: have all the members of this committee undergone carbon literacy training? And it would be quite nice to have a hands up in answer to that, if you have. Not quite all, but yes, thank you. And if not, will the others please do so as soon as possible to equip them better to serve in this capacity? And then what steps are being taken to offer such training to all members and to all senior officers, please?
Thank you for that question, Jenny. So I know that in the post-May period, training was offered to all elected members. Those who may not have attended it may have had issues with timings and being able to get onto that thing. But I do know that there was an intention to get carbon literacy as an education point for elected members on the agenda as an annual thing, not just merely to make sure that you have a one-off information giving session, but to make sure that everyone's staying current on what's going on. What I will seek for, I also know that there was a carbon literacy thing earlier this week for people from within the council, employees of the council, and I know that that's a continuation of efforts that have been ongoing for 2 years now to raise the climate agenda. I know that I've got, we normally don't bring in elected members from the floor, but I'll bring in Chris and Douglas just to help bring some clarity there. Chris and then Douglas.
Thank you, Chair. The South Yorkshire Pensions Authority has also done some training on this, so I did actually do some through the South Yorkshire, as well as logging on to some of the training on the Sheffield, so I've done it. So you can be assured that Pension Authority members have all had that training as well.
Thank you, Chris. Really appreciate that, and I know that the pension has been on the agenda several times. Doug?
I was just going to report back that for the senior officers of the council, the directors and executive directors and heads of service had a full day of the in-person carbon literacy training. There were about 120 of the most senior staff in the council attended that, which is, I think, a really important step to get embedded in at the senior governance level there. And the anecdotal feedback we got is that it was very well received and really well understood, and people benefited from it, so that's a good thing.
And I've got Dan and Maz, but what I kind of think is I don't want to open it up too much to all members to contribute on. So I'll take something from Diane now, and then what I can do, I know Maz was looking to come in there, but I'm kind of thinking we've got an agenda we want to move on to, if we can, for the local plan bit. But I'll bring Diane now, and what we will do is we'll forward the question on to Mark Whitworth and his team, and try and get a comprehensive answer to you as to.
Yes, I mean, I'd be quite interested to know what the training consists of as well. Yes.
Yeah. So we'll try and get a more detailed. We'll get a more detailed answer for you, Jenny. Diane, briefly.
Very briefly, Chair. Any members that were not able to log on to the training are able to pick up the slides and the questions as the dialogue from an online members portal that is being populated and developed.
And a video as well.
And the video, yeah, as Matt says.
Good, thank you.
Thank you. So I know there's lots of people who would like to contribute on that one, but obviously the time scale in the agenda today means we can't go into that further, but we'll try and get a written answer from Mark and his team to further let you know what's going on and, the content as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny.
May I sit on a comfortable chair, please? Is that all right? If I move along one. Jenny, sorry. And I just asked you to... I thought I'd done it.
It's okay, it's
Wasn't it the left one?
If you can find a comfortable chair, Jenny, you're welcome to it. Good luck with that one. Okay. And we've got a second question from Anne Ash, who's not here today. Is that correct?
Yes.
Do you want to read that out for members? Sorry.
So this is from Anne Ash. I'll just read it out verbatim. I'm not me, but this is on behalf of Anne Ash. I'm involved with South Yorkshire Climate Alliance, which very much wants to see climate issues embedded fully in the Sheffield local plan. My question encompasses this topic. I'd like to ask whether there has been any assessment of the contribution that each spatial option would make towards tackling climate change through 1. Supporting the Council's 2030 net zero carbon target, e.g. using sustainable design. 2. Maintaining a net zero situation after 2030 and beyond the local plan horizon of 2039. 3. Facilitating renewable energy provision. 4. Enabling sustainable travel patterns. 5. Reducing the impact of climate change and tackling its impact, e.g. maintaining a green cover to counter the urban heat island effect that is associated with rising temperatures, especially in the core urban area. Protecting against extreme weather events and ensuring a reduction in flood risk. And point 6, enhancing Sheffield's ecological status and achieving net biodiversity gain. Further, she goes on to say, related to this is the question of whether such assessments would form part of the site selection process for determining allocated sites once the spatial option has been chosen. I agree with the Council's sequential approach for determining site allocations as set out in this useful paper and understand the difficulty of achieving the Government's revised and uplifted housing target for Sheffield. Has any assessment been done on the option of increasing net densities so as to reduce the amount of land needed, so making the targets more achievable? In terms of climate issues, this would have the advantage of supporting the development of walkable neighbourhoods as devised in the new Essex Design Guide.
Thank you for that, and thank you to Anne for the really helpful and constructive question that she's put in here. Simon, you've been indicated as the person to come back on this. So without going into it in too much detail, will you be able to provide a written answer? And if you want to touch on some of the points raised there, then that would be much appreciated. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Yes, I think there are quite a lot of elements to that question, but perhaps if I can just touch on a few of those issues that it raises. So I think first of all, yeah, absolutely, carbon reduction and the climate emergency and the nature emergency will be very much issues that are and need to be tackled through the new local plan. I think it's perhaps useful to think about the way in which the local plan can contribute towards tackling these issues in two ways. First of all, in terms of the spatial pattern of development, which I think Anne Ash has indicated there in the question, but also, so that's about the where, so where development takes place, and to some extent that also relates to how much development, which is very much, those are very much the issues which are the subject of the paper that we're considering today. The other element is really about sustainable design, and I think it's fair to say that whichever option is chosen will be subject to policies around sustainable design, which will be incorporated into the new local plan. So we're less concerned with those elements in terms of the paper today, but I just want to reassure Anne Ash that those issues will be addressed through the local plan. In terms of other elements that she's raised there, yes, very much these issues will be addressed through the site selection process. We're also, we'll be undertaking an integrated impact assessment which looks at the environmental impacts but also the equality and health impacts of the different sites that are being put forward for development. So that will be part of the site selection process. And in terms of other issues that are raised in terms of density and whether we've looked at density, well, I think one of the things we've said in the paper is that whichever option is chosen today, they all propose a significant intensification of development within the central area of Sheffield. So we've looked very closely at how we can increase the capacity of the central area, and some of that is about increasing density in a sensitive way, reflecting the character of different parts of the central area. So it's not a blanket tall buildings everywhere. We do need to take account of the historic character of different parts of Sheffield, and that's reflected in the assessments that have been done for looking at the capacity of the central area. In terms of other parts of the city, we have looked very closely at whether there are opportunities to increase density in those areas, but again, we need to be mindful of the character of those areas. It's not appropriate to build tall buildings everywhere in the city, and I don't think anyone would think that's the right thing to do. But wherever possible, we do want to make sure there's efficient use of land, and we will encourage higher densities where there are in locations which are highly accessible, for example, near to railway stations, near to district centres. And that's very much part of the policy that's actually already in the adopted local plan, but we'll be looking at those density guidelines again as part of the new plan. So I hope that gives some reassurance. I think one of the things was about biodiversity net gain and protection of biodiversity. Again, those will be issues that will be looked at as part of the site selection process. So I hope that gives a flavour of how we'll cover the issues in the plan, Chair.
Thank you, Simon. And I know that Anne's not able to be with us today, but hopefully if you could get a written response covering some of those detailed points. And much of those points we have already touched upon throughout the committee's discussions prior to this meeting today. So it is very much in our mind. And I do appreciate the way the question mentions the sequential approach that we're taking. So though we are looking at the spatial options today, we have already touched on certain elements of the design principles going forward and the expectations of Sheffield and the city on other elements. So we will be pursuing that. Today is not just the end of this conversation, it's just hopefully the progression onto the next stage of this conversation. So thank you for that, and thank you, Anne, for your question. So, go on then, Maz, go on then. Make it brief.
My name is Brighton. It's usually the officer and the politician that usually respond, if that's right, Chair. No, I'm grateful for Anne's comments. She welcomes the report. It's great to hear that she recognises it's very detailed and informative. It was just the final paragraph, Chair. It was just to say I appreciate that Anne recognises the difficulty the government's put us in, which is obviously also reflected in the report. And when I get an opportunity to come back, I will be saying that we are now arranging a meeting with myself and the officers to go down to government to have a conversation regarding the figures. Thank you, Chair.
Cheers, Maz. I'm still trying to get my head around what we're supposed to do with these transitional committees as we're making up as we go along. So apologise if you feel that I was ignoring you, mate. Not my intention. So hopefully we'll get a written answer off to Anne. And there's no other questions or petitions? So we can move on over to the main item now of the local plan, and hand over to officers to give us a brief introduction and then move on to the questions. Michael.
Chair, thank you. I'm just going to pass straight across to Simon, actually, who's just prepared a bit of a summary of the report and the sort of the more salient points within it. So he's just going to read a bit of a statement for 5 minutes just to cover those off, Chair. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I think it's useful just to spend a few minutes sort of introducing and reiterating some of the key issues that we've raised with the committee over the last couple of months in discussions around these options. So this report relates to the production of Sheffield's local plan, what we're calling the Sheffield Plan. And the purpose of the report is to set out the overall spatial options for meeting future development needs in Sheffield in the period to 2039. And it's 2039 because we expect the plan to be adopted in 2024 and the plan needs to look 15 years ahead. The aim is for the Council to reach agreement on a preferred approach in advance of producing the publication draft Sheffield Plan. So that's the next formal stage of consultation. And we're aiming to publish that plan for consultation in October this year. This process of looking first at the spatial options was agreed by the Cooperative Executive in October last year, when a revised timetable for producing the local plan was also agreed. So that's the new local development scheme that was agreed in October. This stage of agreeing the overall spatial approach is not part of the statutory local plan process, but we felt it was necessary to try and build a political consensus about the best overall approach in terms of providing land for jobs, housing and other uses in Sheffield over the next sort of 15 to 20 years. We felt this approach was necessary largely because of a significant change to government policy that was made in December 2020 when the government changed its methodology for calculating future housing need. So this methodology is really about what the government refers to as the objectively assessed housing need, and that's the phrase that's used within the National Planning Policy Framework. When we consulted on the Sheffield Plan issues and options in autumn 2020, the government's methodology at that time was indicating we would need to build about 40,000 new homes. We felt that was reasonable because it aligned with the city's jobs growth aspirations as set out in the Sheffield City Region Strategic Economic Plan. The change to the methodology in December 2020 means the housing need figure has been increased by 35%. To over 53,500 homes, so a big increase from the 40,000 we thought we were going to need to plan for. This urban uplift was applied to London and the 19 other largest urban centres in England. The government would no doubt note that this supports their levelling up agenda and prioritises brownfield development, and indeed the 35% uplift was very much aimed at city centres, and the government has said a number of times that the intention is to prioritise brownfield development in those centres. What it implies, though, for Sheffield is a significant level of migration to the city from other parts of the UK or from abroad. I think this objectively assessed housing need figure, it's very clear in the National Planning Policy Framework that this is the starting point for setting the housing requirement. So the requirement is the figure that will eventually be set within the local plan, sometimes referred to as the housing target. However, the expectation in the National Planning Policy Framework is that the objectively assessed housing need will be met in full, and that's the figure calculated by the government. However, we can set a different figure if there is good evidence to show why the government's figure should not be met, and if doing so would harm assets identified in the National Planning Policy Framework as being of particular importance. And those assets that are listed in the National Planning Policy Framework include Green Belt, and they include sites of special scientific interest, both of which are relevant to Sheffield. So the report before you today sets out 5 spatial options for accommodating housing growth. The first 4 options are essentially capacity-led, and by that I mean that the housing requirement figure that would be determined by the amount of land that is allocated under that particular option. So the first 4 options are all capacity-led. So under option 1, the requirement would be constrained by the supply of brownfield sites that are available. In theory, our analysis suggests that up to 37,300 homes could be provided on brownfield sites in the existing urban areas. Under option 2, this would involve developing some previously undeveloped land within the urban area, and we define the urban area as being that area that is not within the green belt. And paragraph 1.6.8 in the report defines what we mean by previously undeveloped land. Under option 3, this would mean developing 2 large brownfield sites in the green belt on the edge of the urban area, as well as the land identified under options 1 and 2. Option 4 would mean that as well as options 1 to 3, we would be developing a limited number of greenfield sites in the green belt where there are site-specific exceptional circumstances to justify that release. For example, where that's necessary to support the reopening of viable rail lines, or where there is a very, very strong urban regeneration argument for releasing that land. Option 5 would mean allocating enough land to meet the full housing need figure, the objectively assessed housing need, as calculated by the government. And we could describe that as the needs-led scenario. For all the options, as I mentioned in answer to the previous question, that the aim would be to maximise the potential of the central area of Sheffield to deliver new homes, and we expect around 20,000 new homes to be provided in the central area by 2039. That capacity analysis is based on work that's been undertaken to support the new city centre vision, which is currently the subject of a public consultation exercise which runs until the 13th of February. There are strong sustainability and economic arguments for seeking to maximise the growth in the central area. First of all, it would help to, for example, it helps to reduce the need to travel, it makes more efficient use of land, and it supports the viability of shops and leisure uses within the central area. I think just before sort of closing in terms of the introduction, I think there are a few important points I wanted to just draw your attention to. First of all, the demographic analysis we commissioned by Iceni Projects, which is referred to in the report, indicates that between 1,994 and 2,323 additional homes per year are needed to support the city's jobs growth aspirations. That's the aspirations that are set out in the Sheffield City Region Strategic Economic Plan. After allowing for a replacement allowance of 50 homes per year, so that's homes that are needed to replace those that are lost through demolition or conversion, that equates to a total need of between 36,750 and 42,700 homes over the period 2021 to 2039. So I think the point there is that significantly less than the figure the government says that we need to build. In deciding which option to recommend, I think the committee needs to weigh up the benefits and disbenefits of each option, and these are set out in the report in some detail. The third point I wanted to make was about the Greenbelt boundary. If we are to alter the Greenbelt boundary, we have to demonstrate that exceptional circumstances exist to make that change. The Greenbelt, as I mentioned earlier, is also identified in the National Planning Policy Framework as an asset of particular importance. So protection of the Greenbelt can, in principle, be used as a reason not to meet the government's housing need in full. The question of whether exceptional circumstances exist to alter the Greenbelt boundary is a matter of judgment. And again, it's about weighing up the pros and cons of the option. So, for example, releasing some Greenbelt land is likely to improve the choice of housing that's available in the city and enable the city to provide more affordable homes. So there are social benefits to releasing some Greenbelt land. But this needs to be weighed against the harm to the environment, including the impact on the need to travel and carbon emissions. So housing built on the edge of the city inevitably will mean that people have to travel further to get to local jobs and services. But also, if we don't provide enough new homes in Sheffield to meet our needs, then it's likely that it will lead to greater commuting into the city from other parts of the city region and other parts of South Yorkshire. And again, that has implications for carbon emissions. So again, something we need to bear in mind in terms of making sure we do, as far as possible, provide enough homes within Sheffield's boundary. One thing that's been very clear in the National Planning Policy Framework is that we should seek to maximise the capacity of the urban areas before considering Greenbelt release, and as I say, the NPPF is very clear on that. So that does mean using previously undeveloped land where it would not harm assets of particular importance or conflict with other policies in the National Planning Policy Framework. So option 2 does, I think, require careful consideration, as ruling it out carries significant risks in terms of getting the plan through examination. So we will need to demonstrate that we have fully considered all options within the urban area. Our recommendation, therefore, will be that these matters should be considered through the detailed site selection process, because there will be an opportunity to look at the site-specific implications of development on previously undeveloped land within the urban area. The fifth point I wanted to make was about employment land. There is enough employment land to last to around 2033, but as the report makes clear, there's an oversupply of poorer quality land, and the city would benefit from better quality sites and better located sites. We do, however, expect that there will be additional supply coming forward through what we've been described as windfall sites, through churn of sites within the existing urban area. So, although we've identified enough land to 2033, I think our feeling was that in numeric terms, that we can make a case that there will be enough land to last to the end of the plan period, purely in numeric terms. The sixth point was really about option one, and I think we wanted to make clear that it would be extremely challenging to sustain the levels of housing delivery the city needs if we're relying purely on brownfield sites. Many brownfield sites are challenging and costly to develop, and it's questionable whether all the identified brownfield supply could actually be delivered by 2039. Certainly, as a city, I'm sure we would want to achieve as much brownfield development as possible, but it may be difficult for every site to be developed by the end of the plan period. The seventh point was really about option 5, and that would mean if we went for option 5, we would also need to provide substantially more employment land. So Greenbelt would need to be released for both employment uses and for housing, and as we set out in the report, that could mean about 7% of the Greenbelt having to be de-designated and allocated for development. I should say, though, a proportion of that land that would be taken out of the Greenbelt would be retained as open space. Perhaps 20 or 30% of it would still remain open in character. And finally, the eighth point really was about the overall spatial approach. Once that's been agreed, there will be a process of site selection, which I've already referred to, whereby all relevant sites will be evaluated against a set of economic, social and environmental criteria. That will enable us to produce a list of proposed allocated sites that fit the overall agreed spatial approach. But it also means that some sites that fit the preferred approach will be ruled out through that site selection process. So it doesn't mean just because you select one option that every site that fits that option will be taken forward as a proposed allocation in the plan. So we fully expect that some sites, for example, will be ruled out due to their impact on biodiversity or the risk of flooding, for example. I think, Chair, that brings me to the end of the introduction. I hope that's helpful in setting out some of the key issues. I know we've covered many of these issues through the discussions we've had over the recent weeks, but we're happy to take further questions from members.
Thank you, Simon. While I'm waiting for members to stick their hands up to show their willingness to come in, I'll start myself and abuse the position of chair, if I may. What we've got here is an indication that we're not saying Sheffield's full. We're not saying that we don't welcome people to Sheffield. We're saying that we want to achieve a Sheffield which is fit for residents here now, and to ensure that Sheffield becomes and remains, rather, a place where people want to come to live, work and play. So what we are looking at here, though it is an argument about the numbers of what we can sustain and what we can deliver to keep Sheffield as it is, a welcoming city, that's what we're looking to achieve through this plan. And I'd be interested to ask if you have a particular preference as to which one of these options you feel most reinforces the nature of Sheffield while allowing it to grow within its confines and keeping it an attractive place to live. And also, it's my understanding that other than option 5 on the paper today, we will be falling somewhat short of government's ask. So if we do not, without prejudicing the discussion here today, if we do not go for option 5, we will be required to go back to government and ask them to rethink their expectations of the city of Sheffield. That is, am I right in that one? So I'll hand that over to Michael and Simon to answer if they could.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, I'll cover up point 2 if that's okay, and I'll pass back to Simon for point 1. In terms of the choice we make today, and if that choice doesn't achieve the government's number, we'd need to go back and have the conversation with them. As a council, there was a motion passed at full council on the 8th of September that identified quite a lot of the concerns that have been borne out through the conversations we've had, really productive conversations we've had through the workshops with this committee over the last few months, and concerns through that council motion around what the government uplift meant for us as a city. So a 20-point letter essentially was sent to the Secretary of State expressing the concerns of members on behalf of Sheffield, on behalf of the people of Sheffield. And what we've received from that really detailed letter was a really detailed response back that was sent back to us as a city council from DLUC on behalf of the Secretary of State on the 25th of November. And the government reaffirmed really what Simon's picked up into the introduction, and there's some really key messages that government sent back to us really, and what they confirmed back to us in writing as part of this really, like I said, detailed correspondence was that the government figure is the starting point for this, you know, and that is to be taken as the starting point and only the starting point. We can and we should take account of our available land supply and take account of our constraints, and not just us as a city, but other locations as well. They have to start with the government figure as the starting point, look at their land supply, look at the constraints that they've got, such as Greenbelt, before deciding on what the housing requirements of that area should be. So government has confirmed that yes, we've got a starting point, which is the government methodology. The process that we're going through today and will continue to go through with our members is the correct process. When you go through that process, you will come out with what is your housing requirement. And a few other key things I've just picked up from that letter, Chair, because I was just looking through it the other day and I thought it might be useful for today. The government recognised in writing that not everywhere can meet the full housing need. And we do have the ability to put forward a different approach. And Greenbelt release requires exceptional circumstances, and that's not to say that you as members can't determine that those exceptional circumstances exist, and that's one of the reasons we're here today. But we need to maximise options outside of the Greenbelt before we consider whether we release Greenbelt. So the necessity for us to go back and have that conversation with government if we choose a different figure, whilst clearly it will be something that we would have a conversation with government about, we don't really need to go to government and tell them that we're going to be doing something different, because that's enshrined within the national approach to this agenda. And the actual best approach to that would be for us to work through this process and actually as a city, through our members, decide, taking account of the public consultation that's taking place, in particular through the issues and options stage and what the people of Sheffield said. For us, for you as members in particular, to come to a view on what the right spatial option is. And at that point, we go and have that conversation, or we write to government again to say that we've done what they asked us to do in the letter, which is to look at our land constraints, look at our land supply, consider all of those options, and then come to a view, a cross-party view if possible, as to what the right choice is for us as a city. And then we go and speak to government. So bearing in mind that we've written that letter and we've had a really detailed response back, essentially saying that the approach that we're putting forward is the right approach, I would suggest that we work through this process and then we have that conversation with government around where we've ended up. Thank you, Chair. Simon, there was the first point as well.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. I think the first question was about what we as officers would suggest would be the best option to take forward for the city. I think weighing all things together and taking account particularly of the need to provide a better supply of employment land, to deliver more affordable homes, again, that's something that came through very strongly in the consultation on the issues and options, the need to protect the environment wherever possible and promote sustainable patterns of development. I think overall we would say option 4 offers, at this point, offers the best way forward. That doesn't mean to say there would be large amounts of Greenbelt released. We would need to go through the site selection process with members and look at the sites that would best meet the needs of the city, going through that process. I think some of the other options, there are significant risks, I think, particularly with option 1, because I just don't think that's going to deliver the best outcome in terms of housing supply, and it would enable us to sustain housing supply at the level needed over the planned period. Option 5 is clearly would have very, very significant environmental impacts, and I don't think that's anything that any of the members here would support, is my impression. And I think what the evidence shows is that we can deliver a housing requirement figure which supports the city's economic growth aspirations, but we don't, there would be no harm caused by setting a figure that's lower than the government's objectively assessed housing need figure, as long as we're within that range that the ICNI projects report suggests that we need to deliver on our economic aspirations. So that would be the sort of balanced view.
Chair, it's just to say that it's just to, I guess, to remind committee and to clarify that the purpose today is for us to follow the hierarchy and the capacity-led approach in our decision making. So it's not about us challenging the government's methodology. It's us seeking to meet the figure identified by government, but through a capacity-led approach where we weigh up the pros versus the cons at each stage. One of them is whether moving to the next spatial option would harm our economic growth aspirations, which Simon's just touched on. And if the evidence suggests that it won't, when you consider an item such as whether very special circumstances exist to release Greenbelt, that's one of the things that we would need to consider through the capacity-led approach. So it's just to clarify that position, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Simon. Tim, I'll bring you in if I could. Thank you.
Surely, I just want to ask and get some clarification on a few things, because you've talked about with the option 4 as your preferred option, and you're talking about limited release of Greenbelt land, greenfield site. Surely that will mean that will be the thing that developers fall on first and hardest, and develop first, which potentially means that quite an amount of what the brownfield sites that we need to be developed then get passed over in this local plan period. How have you factored that in as in your deliberations? Because one of the other things that you said was viable reopening of railway lines as an option in terms of why we're looking at greenfield, greenbelt land. Now, the problem with that is I know that railway lines that are in existence that could do with repurposing for passenger transport in different modes and different methods. I can't see of any prospect of any railway lines being reopened that have been closed and the track's not there, because and all that, from coming from the east of England, just outside Cambridge, I can see how this can develop, which is developers say we want to be beside where that potential railway line is going to be, and then the railway line never gets built, and then you've got tens of thousands of houses in places that we wouldn't necessarily have developed in. How have you factored that in?
Chair, I think the first thing to say in relation to option 4 is that it's not wholesale greenbelt release to meet the we wouldn't anticipate being a wholesale greenbelt release to meet the full methodology if that's the option that was pushed forward. What we'd anticipate with yourselves as decision makers is that it would be a limited number of sites, because the benefits of delivering those sites would constitute very special circumstances. Those sites coming forward alongside or perhaps in advance of some brownfield sites, as a city, we wouldn't anticipate to cause any significant disbenefit because of what we'd anticipate to be the number of those sites and the benefits that's associated with them. But that really is for the decision maker to take a view on whether that's the right spatial option to move forward, to consider whether exceptional circumstances would exist for those sites, and if it was considered that we should move forward with that option to explore that through site selection, each of those sites and the benefits of releasing each of those sites, and whether on a site-by-site basis that would be the right thing to do. In terms of a promise of opening a railway line that's not delivered in thousands of homes, again, I wouldn't anticipate these particular sites representing thousands of homes. The rationale, the potential, the risk of a railway line, for example, not opening is something that, again, would need to be weighed up as part of the consideration as to whether very special circumstances would exist to release that site if that was a spatial option we move forward with.
Go on, Tim, do you want to come back in there?
I was going to say, because one of the things is that in putting in greenbelt, greenfield sites, and level of protest and the nature of the geography of Sheffield, any new greenfield, greenbelt sites that we are looking for is only going to increase the amount of commuter traffic that comes into Sheffield. And that's not what I thought that we're aiming for as a council to do, because what we need to do is reduce the amount of distance that people travel and commute to work. And inevitably, all I can see with the geography of Sheffield is that those sites that are released are only going to increase commuting and clog up the city by cars and transport. So I can't see how you can square that circle.
Yeah, I think perhaps I'll just come back on that point, Chair. I think it's important to recognise that the urban area of Sheffield is not sort of a homogeneous area, and that there are wedges of greenbelt that penetrate quite well into the urban area. And so when we do the site selection process, we'll be looking very carefully at sort of accessibility issues, at access to public transport, how people would travel to the city centre or to jobs and to local services. Those would all be things that we looked at on a site-by-site basis. I think the other thing is to say that I think we envisaged that there would be a fairly small number of sites where we would be able to demonstrate there are site-specific exceptional circumstances. So we might be talking about perhaps 3 or 4, 5 sites. Now, each of those sites will only deliver a certain number of new homes per year. So let's say there were 3 sites that we decided to allocate within the Greenbelt. Each of those sites, if they're a large strategic site, would perhaps deliver 150 to 200 homes a year. So they're going to be built out over a long period of time. That all that housing wouldn't happen at once. So to say that all the development would happen on greenfield sites at the beginning of the plan period, I don't think is correct. It would happen over a long period of time, and you might deliver perhaps 400 or 500 homes on those 3 or 4 sites each year. So perhaps a quarter of the supply, a quarter or a fifth of the supply that we need, depending on what the eventual housing requirement figure is, would be on those greenfield sites. The remainder would be on brownfield sites. So the majority of homes that we will be building in the city over the next 15 to 20 years would be on brownfield sites. So I don't think it's a huge concern that the developers would just cherry pick lots of the greenfield sites first. I think if we went for option 5, that is obviously a much greater risk, because the number of sites being released would be much greater, and therefore you would have far more outlets where developers could be marketing homes on greenfield sites.
Thank you, Simon. Tim, you said you had several things. Do you want to come back in with another thing?
I'll come back later. I don't want to hog the microphone today.
Feel free, mate. Don't worry about it. One of the things I picked up from Tim's question, and going back to the point I raised about the discussions with government, is when we do go back to government with whatever option that we decide we feel is preferential for the city, and government then says, oh, well, we'd like more houses, because it feels like it might be a pokey game of them wanting to push the ante up and us saying possibly no, although that's prejudicing the outcome of this discussion. Would we be able to demand from government or expect from government as cast iron, and I'm saying this carefully because I'm mindful that Boris's promises aren't necessarily the best, but avoiding that element, would we be getting looking to seek from government a guarantee of monies to support infrastructure, to support housing development, should they want a number greater than ours?
Chair, as long as we follow the approach that's set out in the report in relation to choosing the spatial option based on our land supply and the constraints, obviously the plan will be submitted to examination, and as part of that examination, and part of the risk here is dependent on the choice that we make in terms of the spatial option. As part of that examination, the government could, or the planning inspectorate could turn around and ask us to go back and consider the proposal that we've put forward, because they don't feel that we've considered it to the depth that we should have considered it. And there's a particular risk around option 1 there, if we chose spatial option 1, which is brownfield only, and we don't maximise the potential of our whole urban area, I say our whole urban area, the previously undeveloped sites within the urban area that have been put forward, if we don't look at those sites that have been put forward through the site selection process and therefore don't seek to maximise those opportunities, there is a chance at that point in particular that government could turn around and say that you really need to go back and do that part of it again. In terms of opportunities to leverage funding, etc., from government, you know, there's a clear agenda put forward around the desire to level up and the desire to redevelop and deliver on brownfield sites. And whatever option we put forward, a significant part of our strategy will be to deliver on those brownfield sites. And on Monday, as a city council with its partners, we launched a public consultation on our strategic vision for the city centre moving forward, that looks at creating distinctive neighbourhoods and bringing 20,000 new residents into the centre. And those strategic pieces and moving forward with those strategic plans, including a local plan, they're the types of things we need to do to put us into the best position to maximise the opportunities from government funding.
Thank you, Michael. Maz, I'll bring you in now if I could. And I've got Diane, Mike and Barbara on the list of questions to come as well. So, Maz.
Yeah, just on that final point, and thank you for bringing me in, Chair, just on that final point, if you speak to our leaders and the mayors in the north, they'll say on levelling up, especially on transport, we've been badly let down. That's quite evident out there. So I thought it's important to put that marker down, because we have been trying to electrify our stations. Say, for example, we need more investment on public transport, which we don't get. So I'm not as optimistic as many others, but I hope we do get an opportunity to level up. For me, Chair, if we pick up what the officer said at the beginning regarding the work we did until the government decided to change the goalposts, we had gone down to government, and the government did listen, because initially the conversation was we were potentially at that time looking at up to 20,000 homes being built in the green belt. So when we spoke to government a few years ago, and it was the previous leader, Councillor Doe, who went down, and she was able to negotiate that rather than having to build on the green belt. They were excited about our plan of increasing the capacity in the city centre, and that additional 20,000 homes, as Michael Johnson has mentioned, we came out on Monday to tell folks of Sheffield, please get involved in that consultation. So another plug from me, it's very important. We've set out a vision, and we want as many of Sheffielders to get involved as possible. And it touches upon, you know, what neighbourhoods should look like what we all have, you know, good access to public transport, GP, schools, shops and so forth. And if we're creating new neighbourhoods and building these extra homes, then it's important, because like many of us politicians sat around here, in our communities we get petitions and so forth from members saying, you know, this extra development has added congestion, or can't get onto public transport. So the city centre vision tries to address that, and hopefully the local plan will do that. Regarding the numbers, as I said earlier, I'm grateful to Anne for her comments, and yesterday Andy Tickle from CPRE, Peak District in South Yorkshire, wrote in as well. So I'd like to thank Andy, because Andy has been involved with us for a number of years, providing his advice, guidance and expertise, and it'd be great to invite Andy back to speak to this group. I'm going to ask myself and Michael to meet with Andy as officer and politician, but I think I would welcome, or Andy, I hope my colleagues around this table would welcome Andy here as well. The third point I'd like to make is I've welcomed the conversation, Chair, that the politics have been put aside, and we've asked the questions, and I'm grateful to the officers who bring that technical expertise and knowledge. You know, it's been a really interesting and challenging discussion. I wasn't aware the government had written back on with this 20-point letter, so it would be helpful, Michael, through you, Chair, if that was circulated, because if it's come from full council, then if we can circulate that to all members, and all members will be aware that this is the response. One of my concerns, Chair, and when Simon was doing this presentation, as the government has said, you know, we want these 19 large authorities, cities, to take on this extra burden because they're trying to shift some of the numbers that they won't take on down in the southeast. It has caused huge problems where towns, and well, it's mainly the towns that don't have the brownfield sites that major cities do, and they're trying to shift that proportion of house building onto authorities like us. As I say, you know, the direction from government now is to look at increasing in city centres. We've already, in a sense, ticked that box. The report that we commissioned, Chair, says that option one, and I know the officers say that is not the preferred option. For me and my colleagues, I think it was a vindication. We'd heard what the city had said to us. We are the greenest city. There was a report out by NatWest last year that recognised the city as the greenest city and the work we do outdoors. But the challenge back from me, Chair, is yesterday the Office of National Statistics, I was just checking on my phone, they released a report regarding population growth. And if you go on their website, they clearly are saying the baby boom in the 60s, sorry, the baby boom after the World War II in the 60s, I'm paraphrasing here, Chair, we'll see more folks, we'll see given a high number of deaths and fewer births. That's what the Office of National Statistics are saying. So they're saying growth will be a lot slower than predicted. So for me, it's important that we have this conversation with government, because we clearly recognise that the 35% figure, and it'd be good for the either Simon or Michael to respond, what that would actually mean. What would we as a city have to do to get that 35%? And for me, once you hear that response, you'll understand where I'm coming from. For me, it's important to have that conversation with government, a grown-up conversation. Like I say, last time they did listen. Here, for me, it's important that we hear from all colleagues, but I do want to go back, and I've asked the leader, I was with the leader this morning, the policy officers, Fred, I've asked him to get in touch with the officers and arrange for us to go down and visit government regarding the numbers there. Regarding the larger sites and smaller sites, as this group is aware, that the next process, and I welcome the work this transitional committee is doing, because everything is brought here for all members to interrogate, ask the questions like we are today. So for me, today is part of that journey, and as part of that journey, I understand some of the discussions we have. You know, a note will be going to the co-op executive, and I'm hoping we can also allow all members, as Michael mentioned, there was a motion that came from this council. I think through you, Chair, and if members are agreeable here, I think we should allow all members of this city to have an opportunity to contribute. If I can come back later on some other points, Chair, I'd be grateful. Thank you.
Thank you, Maz. Michael?
Chair, it's just to say we do have the letter from government, and if the committee wanted, I'm sure, I'm sorry Simon to put you in a position, but I'm sure Simon could read that letter in terms of government's response back to the points that we put across. We've also got the letter that we sent after the full council resolution. If you wanted us to read both of those out or one of those out, I certainly think it would be good just to get a clear understanding of the depth and the breadth of the letter that was sent to the Secretary of State and the advice that came back from the Secretary of State, just to be clear about the extent of that conversation. I think it might be helpful for Simon, apologies Simon, to potentially read that letter out.
Go on. I'm also mindful that, being as people know that that letter exists, rather than us being inquired for release of that, would it be possible to circulate that or make that public, or is that not something we can do? Other than obviously, because obviously you're prepared to read extracts of that, which puts it into the public realm now. Would it not be easier just to kind of put the whole thing into the public realm?
I mean, there'd be no issue with putting it in the public realm. There's no problem whatsoever with that, and we could circulate it to committee. But for the sake of committee today, if we could take a few minutes, I think, to read the Michael Gove letter, because it does feel like quite an important point to understand the depth of the conversation that we've the depth of the letter and the response that came back from government, to understand where we are with that.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and thank you for that. I'd not thought that having insight of that letter would help us in our considerations today. So, yeah, please go for it, Simon.
I'll do my best. Okay. So the letter says, thank you for your letter of the 22nd of September to the Right Honourable Michael Gove MP, setting out a resolution of Sheffield City Council relating to housing and local plan matters, which was tabled at its meeting held on the 8th of September. We've been asked to reply on behalf of the Secretary of State, and we are sorry that we were not able to respond sooner. Due to the quasi-judicial role of ministers in the planning system, we are unable to comment on a specific local plan. We do hope, however, that you find the following information useful. The government is very conscious of the effect that development can have on local communities and our environment. Through our planning reforms, we have set out that local and neighbourhood plans are fundamental to giving local people more power over planning decisions that affect them. Equally, there is no doubt that we have not been building enough homes to meet our country's need for too long. To help achieve our manifesto commitment to deliver 300,000 homes annually by the mid-2020s, and 1 million homes over this Parliament, it is important that local authorities plan positively to meet their full housing needs. Our National Planning Policy Framework introduced the standard method for calculating local housing need, which gives a starting point for local authorities in identifying the housing need in their area. Following consultation in December 2020, we changed the standard method for calculating local housing need to help deliver our manifesto commitment of 300,000 homes a year by the mid-2020s, whilst continuing to protect the green belt and make best use of brownfield and urban centre land. This is to focus greater need into our 20 biggest cities and urban areas, including Sheffield, to maximise existing infrastructure and to support development that reduces the need for high carbon travel. All other local authorities in England should see no change compared to the previous method, so will continue to calculate their local housing need in the same way as previously. The uplift in need within our biggest cities and urban centres in England will also help support our wider objectives of regenerating brownfield sites, renewal and levelling up. We would emphasise that local housing need does not set a target for the number of homes to be built. Local authorities take into account land supply, constraints such as greenbelt and local green space, and cooperation with neighbouring authorities on whether needs should be shared before deciding their housing requirement. This recognises that not everyone will be able to meet their housing need in full. Local authorities can put forward a different approach to the standard method if they wish, although a different method should only be used in exceptional circumstances, and there should be a strong justification for doing so. The government is committed to protecting and enhancing the Greenbelt, and strong protections for Greenbelt land are provided in the National Planning Policy Framework. A local authority can alter the boundary of Greenbelt land only in exceptional circumstances and where it can show that it has fully examined all other reasonable options for meeting its development need. This means that the authority should show that it has used as much brownfield land as possible, optimised development densities, and discussed with neighbouring authorities whether they could accommodate some of the development needed. The framework is also clear that most new building is inappropriate in the green belt and should be refused planning permission unless there are very special circumstances. We would emphasise that having an effective, up-to-date plan in place is essential to planning and for meeting housing requirements in ways that make good use of land and result in well-designed and attractive places to live. It's also the best way to protect an area from inappropriate development. The government expects local authorities to work together to plan for and deliver the housing and infrastructure our communities need. After the consultation on the White Paper last year, the Housing Minister clearly reiterated the importance of having up-to-date plans in place in his written ministerial statement of the 19th of January 2021. We understand your concern that housing must be of the right type and size and the need for more affordable and social housing. The National Planning Policy Framework is clear that the size, type and tenure of housing needed for different groups in the community should be assessed and reflected in planning policies, including for those who require affordable housing and people who rent their homes. Alongside this, the government is investing over £12 billion in affordable housing over 5 years, the largest investment in affordable housing in a decade. This includes the new £11.5 billion affordable housing programme, which will provide up to 180,000 new homes across the country, should economic conditions allow. Since 2010, we've delivered over 542,400 new affordable homes, including 382,300 affordable homes for rent, of which over 149,400 homes are for social rent. The new affordable housing programme will deliver more than double the social rent of the current programme, with around 32,000 social rent homes due to be delivered. As the Secretary of State is new to the department, he continues to familiarise himself with the new department's work and what policies he intends to take forward. We are considering the best way forward in relation to proposals to reform the planning system, and an announcement on our proposed way forward will be made in due course.
Thank you, Simon. Michael.
Chair, just to apologise to Simon again for making him read that, and secondly, I guess it's just to highlight the key elements in there about reinforcing what we're doing, but also the willingness for government to listen to a different approach, and again to emphasise the fact that this conversation and what we're doing today and what we're proposing to do over the next 2 to 3 weeks, firstly with the cooperative executive next week, but also with full council to make sure that all members do get their say. But we use this forum as a cross-party way to provide an initial steer and preference, is for us to decide what that, or for you as members to decide what that different approach is, so we can go to government with that different approach and have that conversation. I suppose so. That's the question about when the right time to go to government is, and they're advocating us looking at what we've got and what our constraints are, so we can understand our approach. And that's the point I'd suggest, where we potentially go to government and outline that approach and have the conversation.
Thank you, Michael. I'll bring in Diane, and I've got Mike, Barbara, Chris and Paul on the list. Diane?
Thank you, Chair. I'm really confused now. First of all, thank you. Thank you very much to officers. Thank you to Simon and Michael. I think the process that we've gone through has been a really useful one for all of us on this committee, because it's brought about some of the arguments and some of the processes and some of the concerns that we all have. And for me, until we started today's conversation, I thought I understood the framework that we're operating in. It's been really, really useful, thank you. And I'm really glad that you're pressing ahead at pace with the consultation on the local plan and the development of the local plan, because we do need a secure framework to work in. And I think the conversations that we've all had in these series of meetings has really shown that we're all ambitious for Sheffield, that we want a series of sustainable communities with affordable homes and them access to the facilities that they need, and good jobs there that bring pride and prosperity into Sheffield, and develop skills in there. I mean, we want that. But I mean, and I can quite clearly recognise from what Simon's just said that we've followed that process through. You've gone through that process with us and told us how you're assessing it quite clearly over the last few weeks. But my question is, going back to something that Greg Fell said yesterday in another concept when he was briefing us about about COVID, Sheffield isn't London. Sheffield isn't London. Sheffield is a very specific city with a character all of its own. It's one of only 2 cities that has national park within its boundaries. It has, in actual fact, within its boundary, it has the first national park that was created. It's kind of like a network of villages. We're not a big city at all. We're a network of communities where we're not even 6 people removed from each other. We all, you can sit in a bus and you can be related to somebody by the time you get into the city. And it's a nice place to live. So my question is, how can we, going through that process and in using the government's framework saying, oh, we were only chancing it when we gave you an uplist in numbers, really we want you to follow this process. How can we keep that character, and what arguments would you use to keep Sheffield Sheffield? So that's number 1. And number 2 is, in going through, and when Simon was reading that letter, it looked as if the sequential test that we used to use years ago is very much around. You know, that you use brownfield sites, and if you can't use brownfield sites, you develop in an urban centre, and if you can't do that, only then will we even consider. Are we going to re-embed that, or is that already embedded in the process as a safeguard so that we know that developers aren't going to cherry pick a nice new greenfield site where they can put unaffordable executive 5-bedroom houses that don't, create a sustainable neighbourhood? I don't want to, if people want to live on those estates, that's okay, but we want sustainable communities and neighbourhoods. I think that's what we're all about, developing that kind of attitude going forward. So 2 questions and a thanks and a lot of confused comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Diane. Michael.
Thank you, Chair. What makes Sheffield Sheffield? I think in terms of, there'll be a different answer to that. There'll be a really different, obviously everyone will have a slightly different answer to that. I think what's important, first and foremost, and it links to the sequential approach in the second question, is firstly, and we've talked around sort of the strategic vision for the city centre and maximising our urban brownfield sites. Now, that all comes down to what makes Sheffield Sheffield and placemaking, and making sure that when we consider our options, the options we consider, we always ask ourselves about what type of place that we'll be creating and what type of environment we'll be creating. And that's, again, there's a capacity-led element to that as well. So you look at the ambition, firstly, with the central area, and that vision talks around distinctive neighbourhoods that aren't full of towers, but are full of different offers that meet different needs of different people within the city. But you take that principle further out. So, for example, and we've said today, we don't feel that option 1 in isolation is the right option for various reasons. But if you chose option 2, which is previously undeveloped land within the urban area, whilst you accept that as a principle today to move forward, then within that there's a site selection criteria that will come forward, and we would look at each site that sat within option 2. And we'd apply the site selection criteria to that. And again, it's worth repeating that that doesn't mean every previously undeveloped site within the urban area will be assessed. It's a very limited number that have been put forward. Part of that assessment, and an inherent part of that assessment, will be character, landscape quality, etc., etc. And the natural consequence of that will be what makes Sheffield Sheffield, what makes this part of the city a good part of the city to live in question. not a direct question, but something that will naturally come out of applying the various site selection criteria to the quality of the site. It will make sure that sites that come forward for allocations are the right sites and the sites that would cause the least harm for that particular area and therefore naturally the character of that area. If that makes sense. The second question was the sequential question. And yes, certainly, and as the report sort of spells out, the whole principle, the whole concept here is a sequential-led approach. And it starts with us, and I think everybody's supportive of us making the most of our brownfield sites in a way, again, that nods to placemaking and ensures that it's an appropriate density. The next place we go to then is previously undeveloped land within our urban area, because it's essential, and that's option 2. It's essential that we seek to maximise opportunities within our urban areas before we consider whether it's appropriate to release greenbelt. Because when you release greenbelt, you need to consider whether those very special circumstances exist to change that greenbelt boundary. Part of the consideration whether those circumstances exist, or will be actually what your evidence base says that you need to support your economic growth aspirations. So you need to make sure that you have taken account all of the environmental checks and the site selection criteria and maximise those opportunities within your urban area. To be able then to assess that against your economic aspirations, and indeed whether you want to be more ambitious than the set out within the economic plan, before you then decide whether exceptional circumstances exist to release the greenbelt. And then you look at brownfield in the greenbelt and then greenfield. So there is a really strong sequential approach to this. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Diane. Mike.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Michael and Simon. This is a superb report, actually. It's one of the best easy-to-read reports I've ever seen come out of the Council. It's clear and obvious and gives you the information that you need, so that's brilliant. On to Greenbelt development first. When the previous consultation was done, option B and C made it fairly clear that any development will be on a reasonably large scale, including being able to service the houses, because and they were looking at 2 or 3 sort of areas where you would go ahead with building hundreds of homes in those areas and then putting the rest of the services and amenities in to support it. Is that still the principle under the spatial options 4 and 5?
Chair, I'll pass over to Simon and just ask Simon just to clarify what we're talking about when we talk about option B and C in the context of Mike's question, if that's okay, just to make sure there's no confusion with the options that are set out in this report.
Yeah, please, that makes sense. Thank you, Simon.
Yeah, so when we consulted on the issues and options in September, October 2020, we set out 3 options there. The first option was focusing growth within the central area and the rest of the urban area. That was option A. Option B involved releasing land for around 5,000 homes in the Greenbelt with less development in the central area. And option C was 10,000 homes on the Greenbelt with, again, even less development in the central area. So those options don't directly correspond with the 5 options we've set out in this paper, but there are overlaps with those options. I think in terms of your question about would we be still looking for a small number of strategic releases, I think yes, that would be our preference, because I think that offers the best opportunity for creating sustainable new communities with open space, with local services, with viable public transport serving those communities. So that would be the preference. That said, there may be a small number of smaller greenbelt sites where site-specific circumstances would justify a release. It might be, for example, where there was a particular need for a site to provide specialist housing for older people, or that type of need could be considered. But I think generally the approach would be to focus on a small number of strategic sites, yes.
Thank you. And my second question, I've some more later, but but this one came out of the letter and the response from the government. It's all very well then talking about brownfield first. We have got a huge industrial heritage in this city with a lot of contaminated land. And what's happened with other local plans that have been approved in terms of funding the clean-up? I was aware some years ago there's about £10 million came into South Yorkshire for clean-up of contaminated land for housing. Is that likely to happen here, or are we going to have to find monies ourselves to deal with that issue? Thank you.
Chair, I mean, it's certainly clear that there are significant viability challenges around delivering on a lot of our brownfield sites, and that's one of the reasons why we've advocated moving beyond option one, whatever option is stated as a preference from an officer point of view. Not to go into too much detail, but there are certainly conversations with government and government departments at this moment around different types of relationships. Not relationships where you bid site by site for funding to get them off the ground, but strategic, long-term relationships to actually deliver on big spatial strategies. It might be that at a cliff, be that within a city centre. But there is, if we are going to deliver on these strategies and government are going to deliver on what they're saying around levelling up and doing things different, I don't like to use the phrase with the north, but with the north, there is a need for us, and particularly for government, to recognise that things have got to change. There is a lot more support that's needed, but it's not just about money, it's about strategic partnerships and strategic relationships moving forward that last beyond the year or beyond the site, but last for a decade with a real sort of vision attached to them. And again, and not to over-mention it, although we might be guilty of that already, but part of that city centre strategic vision work is to set that vision for us as a city, and to be able to use that type of vision to go and grow those relationships with government, with the private sector as well, but a real focus around those strategic relationships for the longer term.
So, Maz, did you want to come in there? I know Simon wanted to come in there.
Just on that one, Chair, as part of the South Yorkshire Mayor Combined Authorities, it's now called, the last couple of years, through you, Chair, the Mayor, Dan Jarvis, and his team have set up a South Yorkshire-wide brownfield fund that supports this activity in Sheffield, at least for the last couple of years, has benefited from that pot of funding that the Mayor makes available. The minutes are circulated and are on the website. Not just Sheffield's benefited from that pot of cash, Barnsley, Doncaster and Rotherham, and we've gone in and as the officers have pointed out, and Councillor Mike has mentioned there, that some of these sites are challenging, and we've knocked on the door of the city region, and they've enabled us, well, they've gave us the funding which has enabled us to take that site forward. I know there's one in my ward at the moment. We thought it was bad, it's worse. And using that resource, working with a number of developers, which includes the council, I'm hoping we'll be announcing that site soon. But there is resource available to do the work to get these sites ready. And as you've recognised, we are an ex-industrial city, and as part of the discussions the Mayor has been having, that's why we've got this resource. But the level of sites that we're on about here, and the officers are right, probably not all of them will be brought forward, but the site I'm referring to in Attercliffe, because of the resource that's required, if it wasn't for that intervention, that site wouldn't have been brought forward. So I'm grateful to the Mayor, Dan Jarvis, and his team that this resource has been made available, and hopefully the work that Dan has done will ensure that when another spending round is made, hopefully the new future Mayor, hopefully Labour, he or she will ensure that this funding continues, because it's not just benefiting Sheffield, as I say, it's also benefiting colleagues in Barnsley, Rotherham and Doncaster. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Maz. Simon?
Yes, Chair. I think perhaps it's useful just to make a couple of points about the 35% uplift and what the government's intentions were, because in the letter the government is saying very clearly that it wants that 35% uplift to be met in city centres on brownfield sites. Yeah. So I think the point I was going to make was that, you know, where we were perhaps 3 years ago in terms of our analysis of the central area of Sheffield, when we thought we could probably accommodate about 10,000 homes within the central area. From the work that we've done through the central area strategy and the work around the city centre vision, we now know from the detailed analysis we've done, we can accommodate double that number. So we've done what the government has asked us to do, and I think there's a very strong case for saying to government that, you know, the city is ambitious about the redevelopment of its central area. It's done the analysis. It's got a clear strategy for what it wants to do in the city centre, and therefore there is a good case for providing the money to help us deliver on that strategy. I think the problem has arisen because when the government changed the methodology in December 2020, they didn't consult with London or the London boroughs or the 19 cities where they gave us the 35% uplift. And so there was no analysis done of what the implications of that 35% uplift would be. And for Sheffield, you know, it's a massive number to go from 40,000 homes to 53,500 homes. So, you know, where do we find that land? You know, we've found an extra 10,000 homes within the central area of Sheffield, but we can't get to that 53,000 homes on brownfield sites. And I think we can make a very clear case to government and to the planning inspector that Sheffield is doing all it can to deliver on brownfield sites.
Thank you, Simon. And that does remind me of something, that we're talking about the future of Sheffield and the homes that we want and the city we want to create. And if we overly focus on the brownfield sites, all we're doing is dwelling on the past and delivering housing on footprints that may no longer be tenable for us in terms of the environmental changes and the climatic concerns that we face going forward. So I think that though we should exploit the brownfield sites, I think it is one of those points that we should exploit those sites appropriately and sustainably, because we could build lots of things on brownfield sites, but that's making homes that nobody may want to live in and may not want to be desirable to a vast number of people. So I think we do have to be cautious about how much we do leverage onto those brownfield sites. Yes, renew them, but not by making homes that nobody wants to live in anymore. So I'll shut up now and move on to Barbara, and we've got Chris and Paul. So Barbara.
Thank you. It's really going back to Tim's point about if we go for option 4 and what protection you can give. Now, Simon, you said you anticipate maybe 4 or 5 sites being available in that option. Now, my worry would be that as a developer might think that that's just a thin end of a wedge. They would purchase land round it speculatively, you know, and then claim that there's an infrastructure in place, so they just develop it a bit further. I mean, I'm trying to think about, you know, comparing what's happened in the past with what potentially could happen under that option. And the other thing is, there are neighbourhood plans in place, some are being developed. Now, obviously there would be a conflict, I suspect, between some neighbourhood plans and, say, option 4. What would have priority under option 4 in the Green Belt? Thank you.
Yes, thanks, Chair. Yeah, I mean, I think undoubtedly when we get to the examination, that whatever strategy we go for, there will be developers and landowners and site promoters who will argue that their site is better than the sites that we are putting forward. That will inevitably happen whichever option we go for. I think the key thing there is for us to have robust evidence about why we've selected the sites we have, and I think, you know, we're confident that we can make a case for certain sites, a strategic case and a site-specific case for the regeneration benefits and the site-specific benefits that certain sites would offer. I won't. You know, I think we have to be honest. There is some risk if we release some green belt that, developers will argue that their sites should also be released, but it is about having good evidence to show why those sites are different. So it's much easier to argue that the brownfield sites in the Greenbelt are different to other sites. It is a bit harder. I won't try and argue otherwise. That releasing some greenfield sites will mean that other owners and developers will argue that their site should also be released as well. But I think it is about having good evidence. That's the point really. In terms of the neighbourhood plans, yes, I mean there could potentially be conflict with the neighbourhood plans. In that situation, the new local plan, once adopted, would take precedence, and that it would be up to them, to the neighbourhood group, to update their neighbourhood plan to fit with and comply with the local plan.
Barbara, yeah?
Thank you. That's food for thought. Thanks.
Coming back on that one and just picking up on that then, it wouldn't necessarily usurp the neighbourhood plans. It would just mean that they may need to be reconsidered. It doesn't invalidate anything that's gone before.
Chair, no, it doesn't mean that the neighbourhood plan dies effectively. It means that if there's a land allocation in the local plan that doesn't reflect the neighbourhood plan, then there's a requirement to update the neighbourhood plan, Simon?
Yeah, I think the expectation would be that the neighbourhood group would need to update their neighbourhood plan to be consistent with the local plan.
Yes. Can I ask, what would happen in developing neighbourhood plans? I mean, sort of basically, it sounds as if they could be on hold until the local plan has been agreed before they would then be approved. Would that be a fair assumption? I mean, I'm not too sure. I think how many are being developed at the moment. I can't remember.
Chair, the neighbourhood plans the two neighbourhood plans that have been delivered and the handful that are moving forward at the moment are all moving forward on the basic principles set out in the NPPF. Now, the same principles will be followed within our local plan. So we wouldn't anticipate there being a significant conflict between the two documents. And of course, we, as a planning service, provide that sort of support to neighbourhood plan groups who do a huge amount of the work themselves, of course. So we wouldn't anticipate there being any significant conflicts between the principles set out in a neighbourhood plan and the principles that a local plan would set out itself. Just in case any neighbourhood group listens back to this, we don't anticipate any significant sort of repercussions. There may be some adjustments needed, but we don't anticipate those adjustments needing to be significant, because one of the principles of the neighbourhood plan is that it can't advocate less development than is advocated in the current development plan. So there shouldn't be a significant shift change between an established neighbourhood plan and the local plan.
Thank you, Simon. I know Maz wanted to come in. I'll bring in Maz and then Tim on that point specifically, and then come back to you, Barbara.
Yeah, and we've also, the discussions myself, Michael have had, we've also released some results to have a paid officer now that will, hopefully he or she will work with neighbourhoods that have got neighbourhood plans. So we've got 3 neighbourhoods. I mean, it was important to resource to have an officer who would work with those communities, but there are a lot of neighbourhoods that don't have neighbourhood plans for whatever reason, be it capacity or social capacity. And I think it's important that the work that's been done, and I'm grateful to Mike with his response, it's just ensuring that at the same time, while we're going out for consultation and so forth, that colleagues like yourself are able to, and like Michael said, somebody's going to hopefully be listening to this and they can play it back. The key bit for me is you'll recognise those communities have put a lot of time and effort in, and they've also been supported by our officers. So, you know, both Simon and Michael and the team there will always ensure that there's no conflict between the two, but the local plan for me, as I've always been told and read, is always the main rider. So, you know, if there's any technical support that they require, hopefully when we get this post holder in, because again it's down to capacity of the current team as well, hopefully that post holder will work with these neighbourhood plans to ensure that they're in sync, and throughout the stage, whatever option we decide to go with today, and as you've heard the discussions we've had, the next stage will be around the criteria selection, and again we'll go back out and consult and speak to communities. So for all of us, I'm hoping at each stage, whatever we agree, we go back out to our communities and say this is what's been agreed, and those with the neighbourhood plans, if they need to make any slight adjustments, then we'll work with them. But you're right, you know, if one of the areas we're proposing to build X amount of homes and the neighbourhood plan says Z, for instance, then you're right, there is a bit of tension, and hopefully through the process we're developing now, I'm hoping there won't be any tension. I know that's very optimistic of me to say that, but it's my starting point, what I said earlier. I do want another conversation with government. I do believe that the figures are unrealistic. I've mentioned the Office of National Statistics coming out yesterday and saying we're going to have slow growth, but it's important that we build homes for all, and that's across the city for me. Thank you, Chair.
Cheers, Maz. I'll bring Tim in, and then we've got Chris and Paul still to ask questions. So, Tim?
It was regarding the neighbourhood plan, and the issue that potentially could arise, and because I'm part of an area where we had our neighbourhood be best one, but I know there's a door one. Now, the issue I have is that as part of the neighbourhood plan, because is you can't recommend less development than is proposed in the local plan, and they've based it on the plan as extant at the moment and the safe policies. Now, if there is a significant increase in housing, for instance, in door that's proposed, how much of a change does it have to be before you then, the neighbourhood plan has to go back to a referendum, because that would be the only right thing to do, given there was a referendum to adopt the local plan in the different areas, and how much does that have to do? Because you can't just say, oh, we'll go back to the people who developed the plan, because they've gone through all the process of having to go via a referendum, and presumably if they then have to adjust their plan to incorporate more houses than they thought was going to be involved, surely there has to be a referendum on that.
Thank you, Tim. Simon?
Yeah, I think it's worth pointing out that neither the BBEST or DOOR neighbourhood plans actually allocate any land for development, and I think that's an important point to make, because when neighbourhood plans were first introduced by the government, it was made very clear that really the role, and the Minister, I can remember the speech by the Minister where he said that basically the role of the local plan is to set out the quantum of development, the amount of development that a neighbourhood plan area should take. It was the role of the neighbourhood plan to say where and how that development should take place. So which areas should be protected as open space, where new facilities should be provided. And I think, you know, if we're into a situation where the local plan is proposing an allocated site in one of the neighbourhood plan areas, it would be very important to work with those neighbourhood planning groups to look at, you know, how the development takes place and where it would take place. Clearly, you know, for any allocation that's proposed in the local plan, it has to go through the examination process. So the inspector would have a view on the boundary of the site, the scale of the site, and whether that was appropriate. But it would also take account of views made by the neighbourhood planning group at that point. And that might mean the neighbourhood planning group might feel that actually the local plan provides enough information and they don't need to do their own neighbourhood plan update because the local plan provides sufficient information, or they may feel they want to provide another level of detail through their neighbourhood plan and an update of that, and that would require going back for another referendum if they were making a significant change to the neighbourhood plan.
Thank you, Simon. It's a very nuanced argument and something difficult to navigate, I suspect, and we may have to come back to that at some stage. Chris, thank you for your patience.
No problem, Chair. I mean, I've got to say thanks to the officers for the work that they've done on this, and it's never going to be easy. I'm just wondering, as a starting point, did we look back at previous plans and how they developed to get a sense of how we wanted to develop this particular plan? And I'm going back to, I don't know if any of you remember it, the Culpin plan that was the South East's development, that's responsible for, see, you don't know it, the Culpin plan. That is the one that developed Althorpe, Westfield, Waterthorpe, parts of Hackenthorpe, and Southall, and Crystal Peaks. And that plan was originally put forward as a joint plan by Sheffield City Council and South Yorkshire County Council. So, as you say, South Yorkshire County Council went in the 84, so that was then subsumed into the UDP at the time. But how much those plans have developed, because land that was set aside for industrial use within Halfway has now had houses built on it. So that was changed as a land swap. Despite members' objections, it was overturned by the Secretary of State, if I remember rightly. And how those plans achieved what they set out to achieve, to know that we're going along the right way to achieve a degree of sustainability again with this plan. And I'll go back to the issues of transport that Maz raised. In the southeast, we've got the line that runs from Chesterfield through Bayton round to Woodhouse, the Barrow Hill line, and we're looking to. There's always been a desire to have that brought back into life as a passenger line or tram train and have direct link to the city centre. And that tram train could be the one that then goes all the way out to Stocksbridge, rather than having a heavy rail, have a tram train system that runs through the city centre, electrified, fast, clean, sustainable. And the other thing that I also want to just point out is, again, areas that used to have some previous industrial use, and this is something that we've got to look at. Brownfield sites in the urban city, in the city centre there, that we've allowed to become gentrified, and I'm thinking of Kelham Island in this, that used to have industry that's now got people living there. We used to call it Shalesmoor, it's now called Kelham Island. It used to be called Neatsend, it's now called something else, you know. Let's try and retain those small industrial areas within the city that people are close enough to, that we don't have to have mass commuting in and out of the city from the edge to the inside or the inside to the edge for industrial use. But yeah, thanks for the work that you've done on this report, and I'm still trying to figure out which option I think is best. It's not easy, but it's how have we developed, looking at previous plans and how have they achieved what we want to set out. Have they achieved it, and will this do the same thing? Will this achieve what we want to, trying to learn lessons from the past? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chris. Mike, Simon, who wants to pick up that one? Simon?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, I mean, I think that my memory only goes back to the UDP, really, but I am aware of the previous sort of township plans in the southeast prior to that. Certainly, I think generally we would say that the sites that were allocated in the unitary development plan, which a lot of which were based on the previous plans, as you said, for the southeast, those plans have been realised. I think over time, obviously, what we've seen is increasing pressure to deliver more housing. We've seen vacant industrial land, surplus industrial sites, brownfield sites redeveloped for housing. And I think over time, obviously, plans become out of date, which is why the government encourages local authorities to keep their plans up to date and update them every 5 years. So if you don't have an up-to-date plan, then it makes it easier for developers to argue for different uses on the sites that were allocated in the original plan. So the key to this is keeping plans up to date, and I think we've made clear in the report it will be important for the new local plan to safeguard land for employment uses, And once they're allocated in the plan for employment, then the presumption is that planning decisions on planning applications will be taken in accordance with the local plan, unless there is other sort of evidence which supports an alternative approach. But generally, the presumption is that decisions are taken in accordance with the local plan. So having an up-to-date plan is the key to this, getting sites allocated for the uses that we want, and protecting land for employment, both within the city centre and other parts of the city as well.
Thank you, Chris and Simon. Paul, you've currently got the last question. Go for it, mate.
Don't speak too soon. You spoke too soon. Okay then, I've got a few questions. I think what I might do is ask the first few, which I think are a bit more just straightforward, and then come back if that's all right, Chair. Okay, so I think the plan needs to be inspirational, and I think we can achieve this by adding to it further than where the homes are going to be built. Such as, high building standards, high ecological standards. The buildings could be carbon neutral with a great emphasis on well-being, usable green spaces and so on for people. Jobs and skills. I wonder even what scope the council has to have something like a land value tax, or something that does something like a land value tax does. And also, of course, having a really good, robust site selection criteria. Now, I know we're not discussing those things yet, but I look forward to doing that. So, these questions then, where am I? Sorry, I've got terrible handwriting today. How sure are you that we can use the ICENI report to justify not accepting the full 35% uplift? And can we keep modifying the plan to improve it and also to react to changing situations?
Who wants to pick up that one, Michael?
Yeah, I'll go first. I think in terms of, we as a group, we've been really focused for the last 3 months on housing and land, and we've touched on a few times the wider narrative, and you're entirely right, Paul. There's the plan as it moves forward, and a key pillar to that is the spatial choice that we make, because that feeds into so much of what the plan will be. But the plan as it moves forward, the narrative of what a local plan is and what a local plan can be in terms of its positive influence on a city is significant, and that's something that you will start to see really come out over the next few months as we move this thing forward. And I think we all acknowledge that because of the fact we've not managed to get a local plan up to this point, that actually that harms us as a city, because of the standards that we ask for people who come in and develop in our city, because that's what our adopted plan asks for. Now, there are things that we've done and things that we will do to help fill that gap, but we can't do everything we need to do for us to actually hold our heads high as a city and say we're hitting the standards we should be hitting until we get this local plan in place. So it's absolutely imperative that we do it, and there's so much positivity that will come out of it, and the narrative associated with it as we move this forward. And as we come out today with a preference and we move forward to full council, etc., that narrative and that positivity will grow, I think, as the people of Sheffield genuinely start to see momentum through the process. I've got issues with my handwriting today as well, I have to confess. ICENI and confidence. I mean, the thing to say and to repeat from where we started earlier, we're entirely confident in the ICENI report and what ICENI have done. The ICENI report isn't there for us to directly challenge the number. The ICENI report is there for us to look at what housing range we need to be able to meet our economic aspirations, to then consider that within our pros and cons when we look at our spatial options, in particular whether exceptional circumstances exist to release greenfield sites or not. In terms of modification, there is a requirement to review a local plan, and that requirement's there every 5 years. Part of what we do today and part of what we state as a preference from a spatial point of view, that will be there to be reviewed in 5 years, and we'll look at our evidence base, we'll look at our delivery, and we'll say whether actually we're getting this right or not. So there are opportunities to modify as we move forward.
Paul?
Thanks. So it's not, doesn't have to be written in stone, you know, we don't have to commit Sheffield to 20 years today, or when, you know, this year. Okay, so this is the really important thing for me. I think when we're choosing, essentially, like I would say, option 3 is pretty much option 2 plus. It doesn't really add a great number of homes to it, does it? And so my concern is that, but if we choose option 3, when we have to develop all the brownfield land and all the previously undeveloped sites, that we might actually be losing some very valuable land and spaces. And so what I would like to do is to preserve the sites of the highest ecological and social value. And I think that when we're discussing the green belt, it's politically charged, and that's a problem. And we know that we have brownfield sites that have rewilded that are of a higher ecological and social value than some of the green belt sites. I've been made aware that already one of the political parties in Sheffield has been delivering leaflets with such a thing in Sheffield, which I think is really unfair and really goes against the spirit of cross-party working and doing the best for Sheffield. So I wonder, is there something like an option 3.5 where we can have the extra number of available sites that you get from option 4, while having a kind of a ceiling on the ecological standard of a site that's allowed to be developed. And so rather than looking at the difficult and politically charged green belt as a, you know, is it green belt, yes or no, that we look at the actual, what the land is, the value of the land in terms of ecology and social value. And is that indeed option 3.5, where we can have basically option 4 with the best urban sites removed and the minimum and worst greenfield sites put in their place?
Thank you, Paul. I mean, Simon might come in and do something a bit more eloquent than this. I think for me, what you're talking about is option 4 with the site selection criteria, as it would naturally look at the biodiversity quality, the ecological quality, and other things of sites when it's scored. I think one of the things to say is that we will, you know, if we choose option 2, if we choose option 3, it will certainly feel like there is more discretion for us to not have the additional pressure to, for example, release or feel pressure to release some brownfield sites, or we could even say elements of brownfield sites that we would otherwise not want to, because we've got more ability to have flexibility as we look through the site selection criteria and look at the range that ICNE set out to achieve, not to harm our economic growth aspirations. So I don't know if Simon would want to come in on that. The other thing I would just say in terms of, yes, we're talking in terms of option 3, there's a limited number of sites that don't do a lot for our numbers, although they do something, and everything's welcome as we try to achieve the government target. What those sites do is, because of their nature, they provide some larger sites that can provide strategic benefits, including potentially helping us with our employment needs. So whilst numerically they might not feel like they do a lot, actually strategically they are important. So it's an important option. I'll pass over to Simon if he wants to add anything else.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. I think if we just look at Appendix 1 for a minute in the report, because what we've set out there is the maximum number of homes that could be delivered under each of the options. I think what we see happening in practice is through the site selection process, there would be a certain number of sites. So let's say we look at option 1, we said up to 2,075 homes per year could be delivered on brownfield sites. In reality, that maximum figure we don't think would be achieved, because there would be some sites that would be removed from as allocations because they've rewilded, because they're at risk of flooding. So you might end up with a figure which would enable you to deliver, let's say, 1,800 homes a year on brownfield sites. If you then add in the previously undeveloped sites within the urban area, you know, at the moment we show, well, if you did all the brownfield and all those previously undeveloped sites, you could get to 2,240. But in reality, you would be not all those previously undeveloped sites would be suitable. So you'd be taking out some of those, you'd be taking out some of the brownfield sites. So the housing requirement figure that we end up with might be something around 2,000 homes per year if we just went with options, if we went with option 2. We might even end up with that figure if we went to option 3 as well, because certainly one of those sites is probably more suitable for employment use than for housing, actually. So it might be better as an employment site. I think what we're saying with option 4 is that it gives us the flexibility to look at some of those sites which are perhaps less valuable in ecological or social terms, to keep those in the mix for now, but we go through the site selection process and we sift out the ones which are most valuable, and we end up with a figure. We might get us to a figure of about sort of 2,100 homes a year by having a small number of greenfield sites in the green belt which are sustainably located, which don't have any impacts in terms of, or no serious impacts in terms of ecology, and they're not at risk from flooding. You know, we go through the site selection process and we come up with a capacity-led housing requirement figure based on all the sites up to option 4, basically. So I think we've set out the maximum numbers that could be delivered here, but what I'm saying is in practice the figure will be lower because of the site selection.
Simon, could I add a supplementary to that? I hope I'm not standing on Paul's toes here. From what you've just said, then government would not be unrealistic should we go to them with, say, option 3 and say, but you're not going to deliver that. You've said that yourself. So we want you to go for option 4. Is that a position we find ourselves in then? Or is government pragmatic enough to understand that we can't sweat those sites to the extreme because it makes that housing unsustainable and unwanted, frankly?
I think, Chair, the reality of the examination, and we could ask government that question now, and government would say what they've said to us several times, and their advisors have said to us, which is that we've got the ability to put forward a different approach, as long as there's a logic to that and we follow the hierarchy as set out in the report. Now, we obviously we can't look to the future and know exactly what government will say. All we can do is put together a report and an approach that follows the logic that is set out within the report itself. So what we would be doing and what we're proposing is to put forward a different approach, whatever that approach is that you ultimately decide on as members, as we've been asked to do by government through the correspondence that we've had with them. So I think until we understand what that approach is and put that forward, realistically that's the answer that we'll get back from government, which is that it is for you to put forward a different evidence-based approach to be able to have that conversation, principally through examination, but I'm sure government will be happy to have a conversation with us when we establish what our approach would be.
Thanks. So, where shall I start with this? Ultimately, I want to ask. Okay, so we know that the timescale is pretty long. You know, because we're all impatient, aren't we? So the timescale, you know, it's a couple of years before we get this plan in action if all goes smoothly. And it will be with government for 15 months, something like, yeah. So if we went to them pushing it and they knocked us back, do we start again from scratch then? Are we back to drawing up the plan, back to consulting, back to another 15 months with government? Because also you made it really clear, Michael, that these numbers begin from the start of the plan. We can't retrospectively put development in. So every year that goes by, every 2,000 houses that are built is 2,000 spaces developed and doesn't come off our... so we still have to find the same number of places after that. So time is really important, isn't it? So what is the risk of getting knocked back from the government?
I mean, time really is important for the exact reason you said, Paul. Every additional year this slips, we lose another 2,000 homes from our supply, and therefore the pressure to find alternative places to put those homes, and that's 2,000 homes from our supply whilst we still have our economic aspirations. So the pressure to find places to put those homes grows, our brownfield supply shrinks, etc., etc. So time really is important here. The risk, as we've said all the way through the workshops, of not meeting the government's target is there. It's a live risk, and the government always has the opportunity, well, the planning inspector through examination always has the opportunity to ask us to go back and reconsider. That's one of the reasons why we're sort of reminding members today why it's important, we feel, to go beyond option one and make sure that we analyse and maximise as much as we reasonably can with social and environmental checks the capacity we've got within our urban areas. And we look at whether we do feel that exceptional circumstances exist to release any green belt sites, because we do need to make sure that the process we've followed is robust. But as I say, that at this point in time, other than being alive to that risk, and in particular the risk associated with not exploring our full urban capacity through option two, the view that will come back from government at this point in time, and we'll come back from government until we actually decide what spatial choice we want to make, whether we want to do something different, is that we should be trying to achieve what the government are asking us to achieve. And if we don't, we need to go away and do the process what we're doing now and decide what alternative approach we put forward. But the risk will always be live if we sit below that government number, which is the starting point. It's worth constantly reminding ourselves that number is the starting point. Simon, I don't know if you've got anything more.
Yeah, just to add there, I mean, the way it would work with the examination is once we submit the plan, there would be, fairly soon after we submit the plan, there would be a meeting with the planning inspector. Once the inspector has looked through the evidence, perhaps 1 to 2 months after the submission, and normally there's a preliminary meeting with the inspector where the inspector raises any concerns about the evidence that's been provided or any concerns about the process that's been undertaken. So at that point, we would know, you know, if the inspector had really serious concerns and thought we were way off the mark, they could say, we recommend that you withdraw the plan and go and do it again. Or the inspector more likely they try to take a pragmatic approach wherever possible, and they might say, go away and provide this additional bit of evidence, and then we'll reconvene and I'll come to another view on that. So we don't know which way it would go, but as Michael says, the further we are away from the government figure, the bigger the risk. But if we can show that we have been through the process of looking at all our urban capacity fully, I think we're in a much better position. I think there is a serious risk of if we just go with option one. I would have to say that is a big risk of just going with option one, that we would get knocked back on that. And I think there are examples. I think it was Brighton, from memory. I think when they went through their local plan process, they were sent back to look at whether there were more opportunities that they hadn't fully examined within their urban areas, and they had to do a further piece of work around urban capacity to show that they had considered all the opportunities within their urban area. So I think the inspector will expect us to have looked at the previously undeveloped sites within the urban areas, which is why I think at this stage it would be premature to sort of rule that out, even if we end up with a relatively small number of those sites going forward as allocations in the plan.
Paul? Thank you, Paul. I've got Doug indicated to ask a question and then Mike asked to come back in, so I'll bring Doug in now.
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to ask about the numbers. So I think what's been helpful is you clarified that the government figure of 53,000 homes is very much the starting point, and I obviously appreciate it's important. But I mean, we're being asked to choose one of the options that you've clearly set out there. But at some point, do we have to make a decision on whether we accept or reject that government methodology and the government housing target figure? Or do we not have to do that because it's just implicit in the way we develop the options and things? I guess you...
Chair, yeah, I mean, that's the key to this, is this is a capacity-led approach, so it's not, and there is a real nuance in here. It's not us saying to the government that we don't feel that we should meet the figure that the government's put forward. And we shouldn't say that, because we should strive to meet it. It's about us looking at what our capacity is and weighing the pros and cons at each step. In particular, the real key sort of test is whether exceptional circumstances, very special circumstances exist to release greenbelt land, taken in a hierarchical approach, which is brownfield, sustainably located greenfield, etc. And the decision makers, members, through weighing that up, will naturally reach a full stop in terms of the benefits versus the disbenefits and whether that constitutes the circumstances to move to the next step. One of the key considerations, as we've talked about, is the range that we need to achieve to meet our economic aspirations. And that natural full stop within the process is the range that you would arrive at, which would be the range that would be our housing requirement.
And I was just thinking, sorry, obviously my interests are in particular about the two formal emergencies we've declared in the city, the climate emergency and the nature emergency. And I mean, I've been clear that we should look at maximising building in as close to the city centre as possible in quite large numbers, despite the fact I'm a representative of City Ward. For those reasons of the climate change, it's about compacting the city, reducing commuting, which is a huge consumer of energy, reducing the costs of living, so actually more people living in well-insulated apartments rather than big drafty detached houses. But obviously that needs safeguards, and the really important thing is that we don't build low-quality housing, low-quality flats like we've seen too many of. We need to see good quality stuff. And the question is about how what are the levers that we've got that if we're densifying building in the city centre and in the urban area, how we safeguard the amenities that we need for that. So in particular, and looking at city centre in particular, the need for open space and also the need for diverse open space and green space in particular. So just really reflecting on the fact that we all know that actually some areas of what's technically classed as brownfield in the city centre can be incredibly important for biodiversity, for wildlife corridors, and just the amenity value because they're so close to so many people's dwellings. And so, in some ways that's more important than some fields on the outskirts. But what are the levers that we've got to control that and make sure that when we build large numbers of housing, it's actually fit for people to live in?
Chair, I mean, first and foremost, the sort of the nature emergency, the climate emergency will be the golden threads that go through this document, as they should be, and the golden threads really that go through organisations like councils moving forward. So that's the first thing to say. The second thing is that how do we, from a quality perspective, how do we get this right? We get this right by getting a local plan in place, first and foremost, because that's the tool that we've got to set those standards. We also get it right by having genuine strategic direction and an identity about what we want to be. Because it's fine saying, you know, it's interesting that the first stage of the city centre strategic work was a capacity study, and that identified we had 20,000 units within the central area that we could deliver on. It was a really blunt instrument, and it's about going beyond your blunt instrument and producing a vision and a strategy around placemaking, and actually what you want that to be and how you want to move forward with these big pieces in the future. And we're talking about the city centre strategic stuff, but it's about master planning for other interventions, be they big or small. So it really is about having that sort of identity. And again, it's kind of what we were talking about before about what makes Sheffield Sheffield. It's about understanding what you want to be, and what these strategies are made up of the future. And the city centre one, for example, it's densification, it's targeted densification in the right parts of the city centre. It's lower, it's lower density in other parts of the city centre, targeted at genuine neighbourhood creation. Because I think we talked about it before, but sort of, you know, what we're seeing the start here really of a different pattern of development, where we get a lot more focus on our sort of brownfields and our city centres, our district centres, and the type of housing offer in the communities that are really going to start to grow around them. Because I think that's definitely the pattern of the future, and that's one of the things that this hierarchical approach and this plan will press.
Thanks. I suppose the thing that concerns me is, just looking at the appendix there, you know, the statement under option 3, that it assumes that all suitable brownfield supply in the urban area is developed, but also assumes all the previously undeveloped sites in the urban area. And actually that's kind of a frightening prospect, to think over building over every blade of grass in the built-up area of the city. Is kind of alarming. Am I right in thinking, is really the reason that you're recommending option 4 because it gives the authority the greatest amount of flexibility? And at what point do we draw in those policies that will enable good quality building and design?
Chair, I think firstly, that sentence in isolation would cause panic. It would cause panic for me as well if we were saying we were going to build on every blade of grass in our urban area. It talks around, and further in the report, it offers a definition of what we're calling previously undeveloped land within the urban area. It's quite a tight definition, so it's not about us building on all of our public parks, etc. There is a quantum of sites. I think it's approximately 3,000 units that you could put on our previously undeveloped land that have been put forward for development. We don't anticipate anywhere near 3,000 being the end number of houses you would put on those sites when they've been through the site selection process. So there would be a really clear, detailed check and challenge around those sites through that site selection process. Can I just ask you to ask the second question again, if you don't mind, please?
Well, I was really just asking about the reason for the recommendation you got for option 4, and whether it's about just maximising flexibility. Is that the key thing you're driving at here?
Certainly, yeah. It's about maximising our flexibility around housing and maximising our flexibility around employment sites. So it gives us a discretion for key strategic opportunities. For example, employment, there's a recognised need for us to provide some better quality sites for logistics. There's a potential for us to provide a site to help the AMID move forward. That option 4 allows the potential for us to have a better geographical spread of homes across the city, and allows us to potentially deliver a mix of homes in different parts of the city, where if you were constrained by option 1 to 3, you wouldn't be able to do so. So it allows that flexibility really for us to deliver on sort of employment and housing issues.
Thank you, Doug. Thank you. Mike.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of points I'd like to pick up on. It's interesting listening to the debate. The issues and options consultation was only 16 months ago, something like that. And we got a pretty clear steer on what people want. Option A 71% of respondents wanted option A. Overwhelmingly, and I'm quoting from the report, there were community groups and individuals. 10% option B and 10% option C. And option C was overwhelmingly consultants and developers. So I'd like to put that in the context here and ask the question, why are the consultants and developers wanting option C?
Michael, Simon?
Chair, to put Simon on the spot again, I just think for the context of the conversation, it's worth us clarifying what option A, B and C was in the issues and options, if that's okay, Simon. Just so there's no confusion with the report in front of members today.
Good luck, Simon.
Yeah, so option A is essentially the same as option 2 in the report, because it assumes that we would deliver a mixture of brownfield and previously undeveloped sites within the existing urban area. So it's saying basically we're not going to build on the greenbelt. Option B was up to 5,000 homes on greenbelt, and option C was up to 10,000 on greenbelt. I suppose the other point to make is that yes, in isolation, people don't want us to be building on greenfield or greenbelt sites, and I think everyone would say we want to minimise that as far as possible. But I think there were a number of other questions in that issues and options consultation, one of which was about, do we need to build more affordable housing? And the overriding response there was, yes, we need to build more affordable housing, we need a better mix of housing, we need more family homes. So it's a very difficult decision, this, because if you don't provide sites which are suitable and which are economically viable, then it makes it very difficult to provide affordable homes. So just saying very simply, well, the public said they only want to build on brownfield sites, it ignores other responses which say, actually, we do need better housing, we need more affordable housing, we need it in different areas, we need it to meet different needs. So that issue in particular, I think, is it's that tension between the social objectives and the environmental objectives is really why we're having this very difficult conversation there.
Mike, yeah.
Thank you. Developers are currently sat on planning permissions that have been approved for about 12,000 homes. That was the number quoted in 2020. And why are they sat on all this development? Why aren't they progressing it? Because they're waiting for the local plan. In reality, they want to see what the other opportunities are before they start moving on what they've already got. And that's the way they work. So when it comes to things like the Greenbelt in certain parts of the city acts as a buffer to prevent urban sprawl, and as Councillor Hurst says, to maintain the character of the villages and the towns that are on the outer side of the city. And I think this is a really important point that is maintained. Some of these towns and some of the villages are conservation areas, and those areas can be badly affected by developments that go around them. The other thing with the extremes of the city is the infrastructure is poor, whether it be road, rail. In some places the bus services are appalling. We don't know whether they'll get sorted out yet. And what will be a major problem is any significant development there before any infrastructure is sorted out, because the local areas can't cope. So I come back to I see me planning's range, and it was a very important piece of work to do that now, to give a clear indication of their view of how they see the demand for houses in the future. And it is still well short of what the government say. And at the end of the day, the government's decision is a political decision, and governments come and governments go. But we have to make a decision that sets this city right until 2039. And We can't make amendments to the local plan once it's approved. It is there to see us through to then, and we have to make sure we get that right now. Councillor Masters mentioned development outside the local plan. I think it was last week, Borough Bridge, which had just moved its green belt boundary for 1,000 homes, had a planning application in while these homes are being built for another 150 right next to that development. Not in the local plan, but the pressure starts. And plenty of developers are buying up pockets of land in strategic locations in the hope that they can get approval within the local plan before they come in behind it with much larger developments. And that's the way it works. Yes, my local people inform me of people who are buying up small packages of 1.5 acre, 2 acres of land for potential development. Perhaps now. So we need to weigh all these things up as part of our decision. So thank you there. Thanks, Chair. I don't know if you want to comment.
Thank you, Mike. There was a couple of observations in there, but Michael, if you want to come back on some of them.
Chair, yeah, I think just for a rounded conversation, I'm just picking up the sort of the developers and agents feedback from the issues and options, because we've probably not dwelt on that. So it's just to pick a few reasons why the developers and agents were plumping for sort of greenbelt. Some of the key things that were said was that it's necessary to meet housing need and support economic growth. And we've talked today around sort of particularly strategic sites, how that provides that flexibility. Deliverability of brownfield sites creates issues from a viability point of view. So I think amongst other issues, there's practicality issues and viability issues around why the development industry, and I think we share this view to an extent as well, so the challenges of delivering brownfield as an option, particularly in isolation, they're very clear, and we've talked around them today, and the flexibility of moving beyond option 1 and option 2 and even option 3 is something that we do feel is worthy of due consideration. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Michael. I'm kind of mindful of time, and despite all the hot air coming out of us politicians, temperature is dropping in here. I want to reiterate that we are an advisory committee. What we say here will be held in consideration by others elsewhere, but we cannot compel others to follow that advice. So I'm going to move around the floor and just see what people's considerations are and expectations are for how we'd want to advise people going forward. And I'm going to move to my deputy chair as first amongst equals and invite Barbara to give her
Thank you
considered
for that,
view.
Mark.
Sorry, Barbara.
Right, okay. I have listened. I'm really concerned. I don't think there's enough protection to the green belt if we actually go for option 4, developing greenfield sites there, and I've explained some of them. I'm concerned about the fact that a lot of brownfield sites are not attract developers because of the problems of, say, contamination, not just size. And I think the fact that we're quite happy to leave allegedly contaminated or difficult sites in the city is not desirable. So we should be making an attempt. And if there is money in the city region to address that, we should be looking at it, exploring it actively. Right. Oh gosh, no, you talk about biodiversity. I mean, just think about Greater Green. When was that started? 2017? All right? Yeah. Yeah, so when you think about especially, along the river, gosh, I've forgotten what the name of the road is, off Ladybridge. When you think about the conversion, it's not fair to say that just because something has not got biodiversity, whether it's in the green belt or the city or the urban area now, it cannot be achieved. And we know full well that all over the country, not just in urban spaces, there is a push to actually improve biodiversity across a whole of our landscape. So I don't think that's an argument. All right. So I think on those grounds, I think I'd go for option 3, because I think it would then allow us to actually focus on improving sort of the land within the city centre, not just for building but for employment purposes. Beyond that, you're going to sort of, if you like, encourage developers to pressurise for developing in the green belt, and that's going to take the focus off the city. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara, and thank you for being so brave and jumping in there in the first place. I'm going to go to the Cabinet member who is responsible for all of this. So if it goes wrong, it's your fault, Maz. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Co-op exec member, and I've got two other colleagues here with me as well, which is great to see. I mean, I'm as I said earlier, I'd like, I wasn't aware of the letter, and that's why I said it's important that we circulate. I wasn't aware of the response. I wasn't aware that we'd been written back and there was these 20 points. I wasn't aware of that. For me, I'm going to stick to my guns. Option one. I hear what the officers are saying. I would like to go back and speak to government. I'm more than prepared to support a different option. If we'd had the conversation sooner, I would have probably done what Councillor Masters has done. I mean, CPRE have written into us, and I value their contribution. But for me, it's important to have that conversation with government because for me, the work that we're doing around climate emergency, affordable housing and so forth, the most important factor for me is the change that's happened within COVID. We do pick up issues about space outside, inside. I mean, something that was out there as a communal space now. I know we've got the site selection criteria that's going to enable us to get to that thinking. The key bit for me is I would like to, in a sense, feel more comfortable with the numbers. As I say, today is an advisory position. If I had to make a decision, an informed decision today, I'd still be pressing to in a sense, because that's a huge uplift. The amount of work, and as it's been said in the report on page 22, where it mentions the work we've done with, I hope I pronounced the company's name correctly, Insignia, recognises the work that we've done. So in a sense, it does validate the approach we're taking on option one and the amount of work that's gone into that. The second bit for me is once we've had that conversation with government, this group will hopefully reconvene, because if you look at the date that we've set that we want to go out for consultation isn't until October 2022. And I think your opening remarks, and if you don't mind me saying, the closing remarks before you got onto this option, you said, you know, our opinion, if that's the right word, is advisory. So for me, more than happy to change my mind, but at this moment in time, I'm sticking to option one. We're the greenest city. We have the outdoor city, and for everything that we've said, I'm going to support option one. As I say, more than happy to change my opinion once we've got an agreement with government. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Maz. Doug, I'll move to you. You just sat right in front of me, mate. Go on, over to you.
Provisional basis, I mean, I think that, you know, we need to grasp this nettle, so I'm happy to take the recommendation and go for option 4. I think it gives us the most flexibility whilst addressing the issues that need to be done, frankly. I think what's important is that we build in the safeguards around the things that we really need.
Thank you for that, Doug, and thank you for your candour. I appreciate that. Mike, I'll make a full sweep of the front row before working my way back. So, Mike, over to you.
Okay, thanks, Chair. I see this as a once in a long time opportunity to actually clean up some of the problems we have in the city. I don't regard the last spoil heap in South Yorkshire as a rewilding opportunity, if I'm honest, and therefore option 3 is my preferred option. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike, and I'd like to say it's an opportunity to thank you for stepping up to fill in for Martin. I hope he's well and recovering. Tim?
You know, my concerns about the green belt, which you haven't quite alleviated on that, and any potential land swaps of that, and looking at the government figures, and I think because we've got a strong case to argue, because it has been the growth numbers that the government have put in, pie in the sky, the numbers, the trend growth in Sheffield, etc., means that we can have sustainable growth within option 3, and that's what I'd go for.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you for that. And thank you for your input throughout this process. Paul, over to you next, mate.
Thank you. Excuse me. Bearing in mind what Michael and Simon have said, that we won't hit the maximum number of homes from each option per year. Options 1, 2 and 3 won't actually meet our own standards, our own target, without the government uplift. I'm going to vote for the option that gives us the best chance of protecting our land of highest ecological and social value, that will give Sheffield a chance of having the best homes. I am going to choose option 4, and I look forward to contributing to the site selection criteria to make sure that my thoughts and beliefs are upheld within that. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. And I know you'll not shy away from this one, so I appreciate that. Thank you. Diane.
Thank you, Chair. As a co-chair of the Planning and Highways Committee, I can see that we have an urgent need for an agreed Sheffield Plan. We don't have a 5-year land supply, we haven't got an agreed plan, and every meeting we see applications come to us brought by developers that don't meet the standards that we would choose for them to reach, and officers have very little with the presumption on granting developments unless there's some major impact, for example, on the Greenbelt. Very, very good officers are struggling to recommend refusal because they haven't got a framework around them. So I welcome this push. I welcome this determined march towards obtaining a local plan. But option 5 is the only one that we can choose that meets the government targets, but the government targets aren't absolute targets. So therefore, I would want a plan that contains spatial options that do the least harm. I would want us to proceed to consultation as soon as we could, and I want the discussions to go ahead about, well, we're doing what we can to protect our environment, we're doing what we can to attain the targets, the maximum growth, we're doing what we can to build sustainable communities. And I also want officers to get the maximum wriggle room they can to manoeuvre to achieve a plan that works for us all. I'm really struggling. I don't know whether I'm going to support option 3. I don't know whether I'm going to support option 4. I think on the basis of it, of the dilemma that I've got, I've put my opinion out there, and I'm not going to select an option. I'm going to abstain. 3.3 option 3. Yeah, the reboot. Thank you.
Thank you, Diane. So I guess we can put you down as an abstention, but hoping for the best outcome of the choice between options 3 and option 4 is what you said. I appreciate that. Thank you, Diane.
Absolutely. Thank you.
And I suppose that coming to planning committees, you're not prejudiced when people are talking to you and asking.
I've got an open mind.
Michael?
Chair, excuse me, it might be a silly question, but just because one of the things we're going to do to move the preferences forward is to record, is it appropriate for us to record just an abstention, or would you like us, I suppose it's a choice, would you like us to record an abstention because you couldn't choose between option 3 or option 4?
record my reasons. That's why I spoke to Michael, so you could understand.
Thank you.
Thank you, Diane. And yes, so if we can make sure that that's minuted appropriately, then that would be really helpful. Chris, to you before I get my bit.
Thank you, Chair. And just to say, if it does all go wrong, we don't blame the members, we blame the officers, just so the officers know where they're sat. I've been looking around the room, actually, I'm probably the longest serving member in here. Came on in whenever it was, 90.
Certainly one with the longest memory.
95. 95 when I came on, so it's a fair while ago. And as I say, I've gone through this process a few times with different plans and what we've done, and it always comes down to the middle. We don't want the worst, and it's always the worst at both ends, and we come down to the middle in option 3. And to be honest, I'm a bit like Diane in this. I find it... I want more reassurance from government. I want that reassurance from government that their methodology is correct, because things have changed in the last 18 months, 2 years, that we can't factor into the methodology that they used when they set these figures. They said, oh, there's going to be this amount of growth, this amount of babies being born, this amount of housing required, this amount of jobs. Things have changed. I'm one of the boomer generation, I know I am, so the boomers are out the way, and what are we on now, the zeros, or no, we've had the millennials, the zeros and all that lot. A gut feeling, and it is a gut feeling, that I want that reassurance, I want that conversation with government, and I want people within the city to have the reassurance that we're trying to get the best sustainable solution for the city. Option 3, in my opinion, is slightly more palatable. I understand option 4, and I understand where Paul came from with that. And again, I think it's option 3.5, but I'm going to go for option 3, chairs, as just because it's the middle ground. I don't like doing this. It's middle ground, and I won't be here after May. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chris. We'll struggle to find an advocate for markets and canal networks, I suspect, quite
and railways and high-rise.
Going forward. So it now falls on me to offer my opinion. Throughout this process, I thought about what Sheffield is and where I want Sheffield to be. Limiting ourselves to building just on the brownfield sites is, I feel, regressive and dangerous, in so much that I'm not sure that over-densification of housing can lead to social value and social justice. Specifically social justice, which is the bit that I really want to see us achieve. I want to see good quality housing that's affordable, not artificially affordable at 80% of a market value, but genuinely affordable to people on genuine incomes. Although I'm really mindful that the developers would tell me that means building in greenfield and greenbelt, because that's the cheapest option to them. However, I do not believe that they will deliver affordable homes for genuine people. So I also am cautious about opening the door and the wedge of allowing unscrupulous developers to come into Sheffield and try and deliver housing on our greenfield sites, our greenbelt sites, sorry. The terminology is easy to confuse and conflate far too often. So for me, I want to see not high densification, but high livability as the goal. If we can achieve that through creative design and creative thinking and capturing all that humanity can do to deliver houses that are fit for people to live in, not just to exist in, then I'll go for that. if we can get safeguards in, I'm quite happy to be more relaxed, but because I do not trust the wedge to be driven further and further in, I'm reluctantly going to go for option 3 as opposed to anything that would otherwise allow the creep of developers' greedy desires. So I'm going to err on the side of option 3. And finally, I'd like to thank everyone for their participation in this debate and this process. It has been a long and difficult one, and bizarrely, we are sending forward a relatively strong recommendation to the executive to note and for full council to then debate. And I really look forward to the representatives of the people of the city coming back with an outcome that we can then take to government, and hopefully they'll show due cognizance to. Michael Gove has suggested that we've been far too subservient to the will of officers, and I think that we can demonstrate that here today, that that is not indeed the case, and actually the will of officers is not an evil or corrupt version of humanity, and I'm hoping that Michael Gove will not be too subservient, pointing towards Simon there, Michael. Simon, you weren't looking, I thought you better watch out there. I'm hoping that Michael Gove will come back with a sensible head-on, having not been to too many garden parties, for sure. So thank you for that, Michael, thank you for that, Simon, and Maz, you're out on a limb, but I recognise that you are prepared to change your mind, and I welcome that one.
Definitely, Chair. As I said earlier, for me, we've got till October 22. As you say, it's going to go to a number of places before we make that final decision. I'm grateful to the officers that have also arranged for us to meet in here safely, so thank you to everybody there. But as I say, the key bit is getting those numbers agreed, and I'm just grateful to political colleagues around this room that there seems to be a bit of a consensus of around option 3.54, and we'll get there. And I'm more than happy once we've got clarity to support that position. So, if I had to make a decision today, it would have been, as I say, around the 3.54. A bit worried about the 4, if I'm being honest with folks. The number 3 seems to work, but like I say, it's an advisory. We're not being asked to make a decision. It's great it's going to the co-op exec, but for me it's also equally important that members across this council, like we've been given this opportunity to contribute, they get that same opportunity as well. And that way, I think, having everybody on board takes us all in that same direction. And again, I look forward to some of these workshops because they have been really informative and useful to us all. Thanks ever so much, Chair.
Thanks, Baz. Chris, I noticed you put your hand up there, and I know you're not going to have much chance to contribute following May. I hope you're not going to be pitching yourself as a consultee for hire.
No, I was just going to say, if you want to look at an innovative piece of urban design for housing, there's a building called 56 Leonard Street in New York. It's called the Jenga Building. Look at that as a fantastic piece of urban design. I won't go on about the cost of the actual apartments in it because they're ridiculous. But as a piece of design, it looks spectacular.
And on those comments, I think it's shown that working cross-party in a consensual manner does mean that we may dangerously start liking each other and get over this partisan nature that we otherwise have. But, thank you, everybody, and thank you, officers, and also Alice and others for supporting us, John and everyone else, for making sure that we can host these meetings and helping push this agenda. Barbara, is there anything you'd like to add as Deputy Chair before we close for the day? Thank you, Barbara. And particularly, I know Barbara has been very supportive throughout this process, and I'd like that reflected in the minutes. One final thing is, could I ask, if possible, could the minutes and information with it that's been provided to the committee today go forward with our sort of recommendations to the Cooperative Executive for next week, at least, and that they... A thrilling 3-hour read. Good luck, the cooperative members. If we could do that, Michael.
Chair, just briefly, either tomorrow or Monday, the Cooperative Executive report will be published. I just checked with Alice about how quickly the minutes can be typed up. What we will do with the Cooperative Executive report is we'll just check, but what I'd suggest is that we put the DLUC letter onto the Cooperative Executive as well, so it's there and it's open, so we can see what government sort of wrote back to us. And we'll put the council resolution letter that was sent to government on there as well. Thanks, Chair, and thanks everybody else as well.
And thanks, Michael. And Alice, I was looking at you nervously, having made that suggestion, and hope it's not too...
Well, Chair, I mean, the minutes do belong with Democratic Services and John. I did take some rather verbatim notes of each person's wording that went with their option choice, which I was going to suggest I shared with Simon and Michael. When I say verbatim, you might not want them publishing, but they're there for your point of view. So I think at least we can do something around what you all said when you chose your option just now. Whether we can do full on everything in the minutes, I'm not sure.
I was just going to, if I can, Chair, I think, you know, because of staff and capacity issues and timing, I think, you know, there's three of us here on the co-op exec. You know, if it was bullet pointed and the minutes followed later, you know, we could say that they'll be on the website as quickly as possible. Anything that reflects what's been said at the meeting is sent forward to the co-op exec is brilliant. Picking up Alice, don't want to be, you know, putting pressure that people are having to drop other things just to get this done. So a note, a bullet pointed note, if that suffices, then happy with that, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Maz. And Diane, briefly.
Sorry, I just need to say my apologies, Chair. I must go because another meeting, the pre-planning discussion meeting, has been delayed for half an hour for me, and it started a quarter of an hour ago. So I'm going to run away if that's okay.
And I think that's an excellent note for us all to go home. Have you not got homes to go to? Last orders have been rung. Off you go. Thank you. And thank you, Jenny, for sitting through that one. I hope it was helpful and informative.